Hey everyone, Jesse here from American Alchemy, and
Chris Ramsay from Canadian Alchemy.
we want to give a big thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring this episode.
That's right. I'll tell you more about how Surfshark can keep you safe online, so stay tuned.
Chris, they want to hear from me, man, not you.
Oh, right. If you were able to use the type of technology that they are using, you'd be able to bounce around and see an infinite number of exoplanets. Grabbing a plant from here, changing it up a bit, dropping it over here, and doing the same with human life. You could just create a little black hole around your craft, and you could go through the whole evolution of our entire known universe in an afternoon. It's like hitting the X button when you're playing a video game to skip past all the cutscenes. It's kind of what they're doing. And so this all feels like this zoo, but not in a way that's like a zoo, but in a way that's the preservation of the seed of life throughout the universe.
The vector along which you are making progress is what do they want? What's the culture on the other side of the non-human intelligence? How do they think of us?
They just don't care about us. It seems like an AI security system. They're kind of here until something else gets here. Some of us may, by chance, through accident, get to meet the lowest form of their kind of this robotic whatever.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh my, it's God.
I'm here with, at this point, my very good friend, Chris Ramsay, who just is one of the most amazing humans I know generally. I think, your former career speaks for itself. You're a world-class magician. And I think you brought your unique approach to that in that you debunk at times or show how magic is done to the average person. But then I think there's also something kind of very magical about you, and you allow for the illusion to persist at times. And now you've started probably my favorite new UFO related channel. It has such an interesting angle because I think you are exploring themes around actually connecting with non-human intelligence, or exploring what they think and how they think about the world, which is, no pun intended, alien, I think, for a lot of people in this topic who are just used to kind of nuts and bolts crafts or stories around sightings. And so it's so refreshing, and the world and universe that you build in each show is just next level. The thoughtfulness that you put into the set and the script and the questions is second to none. So appreciate you being here, man.
Thank you so much for saying those kind words. I really appreciate it, and it means a lot coming from you. Being someone in the space, I think you're obviously the ambassador to this topic on the platform. And so it means a lot coming from you. Thank you so much.
Well, I don't know. I don't think of myself as an ambassador, but
and I think that's what makes you a good ambassador.
Okay. So I want to talk about your transition from magic to UFOs, because I think magic gives you such an interesting lens. We were talking last night, you were talking about kind of techniques in hypnotism that you're aware of. And I'm sure that gives you an overlay or a lens through which you view the UFO thing, where there's a lot of misdirection. There's a lot of, weird ulterior motives and narratives and stuff. Do you think you have a better eye for those because of your magic background? On American Alchemy, we're all about exploring big ideas and breakthroughs.
So it's fitting that we'd partner with a company that takes privacy and freedom just as seriously. Thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring this video.
One of the coolest Surfshark features is the ability to virtually travel. With servers in over 100 countries, you can switch your IP location and unlock extra content libraries or content that's normally geo-restricted.
If you're abroad, you can bounce back to your home country's IP so you never miss your favorite shows, no matter where you are.
Additionally, public Wi-Fi hotspots like coffee shops or airports are data goldmines for hackers. Are you aware of that?
I am now.
Surfshark protects your personal info by encrypting all of your internet traffic. So whether you're downloading research articles from the show or just catching up on emails on the go, your data stays private.
You know what? Here's the best part. Use the link, Jesse's link, his link, in the description below, and go to
surfshark.com/American Alchemy for 4 extra months for free. How does that sound?
4 extra months? Golly.
pretty big deal. Surfshark also has a 30-day money-back guarantee. So there's zero risk in trying it out. No risk at all.
None.
Whatsoever. One account works on an unlimited number of devices too, which is great for all your gadgets.
Try it today at surfshark.com/American Alchemy. I think I definitely have a better awareness of them. Doesn't make me immune to them. But the awareness does provide me with a little bit more of a heads up when something's happening. I think it's a sixth sense. Naturally, as a magician, you're kind of the interesting thing is that a lot of people like yourself who are really interested in how things work and methodology, that's what draws a lot of people to becoming a magician, because we're interested in methods and how things work and sort of reverse engineering a moment. And how do we create this moment? How is that created? Like if you show a magic trick to someone, there's a few different reactions that someone will have. And depending on their background history, if you obviously do a magic trick to someone, abroad or in a third world country, it might be a different reaction than if I showed someone, in Vegas a magic trick, right? So we all have our own sort of realities that we deal with when we see magic, but some people will get frustrated because all they care about is how it works, right? It doesn't sit well with them. And although I loved the fiction of it all, part of me was just like, wait a second, I need to know how this works. And so I see a lot of that in you, and I see a lot of that in people who do like this investigative journalism, in that they're just not satisfied until they understand how it works. And so that's just a big part of magic is when you start observing relationships or moments or even technology, you're constantly in your brain immediately going to, okay, well, how does that function? How does that, play? Because some people will just be enamored by the actual moment. Other people will be like enamored on the outside, but on the inside, the cogs are just spinning and whirring. And they're like, well, hold on. Well, how does this actually how is this possible? And then as a magician, you're able to accumulate just a wealth of knowledge through all these books that are available to, magicians that include psychology, misdirection, showmanship, sleight of hand, all these different elements, hypnosis. And then so you just keep adding to your tool belt all these method building practices. And so when you're observing things in the natural world that might not have anything to do with magic, you're automatically relating it back to some psychology or something else. And so naturally with UFO stuff, I think it's just a big puzzle. It's like a big magic trick.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, what's the mechanism?
It's almost the ultimate puzzle. I know very few people who spend a lot of time in it, who I think there are local threads where it's like, this thing might work like this, and this pattern matches to this other thing I learned over here, and they're uncorrelated sources, so that, there's probably something to like, this particular, the sulfur coming off of, extraterrestrial bodies or whatever, things like that. And you sort of build this model. But I know very few people who spend a significant amount of time in the topic who have a very internally consistent and comprehensive worldview as to how it works. And so in that sense, I think it's the ultimate puzzle.
Yeah. It's definitely, it definitely feels that way. And the finding connections, I think it's just another natural ability that our brains have. And then the deeper you go into being interested in methodology, the more you're inclined to make those connections. And someone like you make so many connections because you've accumulated this wealth of knowledge from all these books and all these experiences and the interesting people you've spoken with, that now you and like UAP Gerb, you guys have this amazing ability to find these connections that otherwise I'd be oblivious to. You know what I mean? So it's, for me, you guys, your mind behaves a lot like a magician's mind would. But instead of learning about sleight of hand, psychology, and misdirection and all that, you guys have learned about, the phenomenon. And so that's why I'm just so enamored by what you guys are doing, because I see myself, in that same realm, just with a different topic.
Absolutely. Well, when did you start? So the new channel is Area 52. Everybody go subscribe right now.
The way that it got started, I was posting on YouTube. I've, had a YouTube channel that dealt with magic and puzzles for a decade. And that was going, fairly well. And a friend of mine who is a memory champion, Nelson Dellis, very interesting guy. Shout out to Nelson. He's a 6-time U.S. memory champ. Very left-brained, went to university for physics, teaches like computer stuff at university. He's a really genuinely smart, bright, and curious person. And I caught wind of him from like this Netflix doc, and I was like, where like he remembers things. I was like, I could use that for magic somehow, right? I want to learn how to do a mind palace. I mean, that would really help me out perhaps with a certain trick. And Harry Lorraine, who's this like old magician, was also like a master at memory work. And so I was like, oh, I need to befriend this guy and like learn from him. And so I did that, and he taught me how to memorize a deck of cards in 5 minutes from a shuffled stack, or all these different things. And I started exchanging, how I could pretend to memorize a deck and make it look the exact same. And he was really like fascinated by that. So we'd start catching out, people who were cheating at memory stuff, and got very interesting. And one day he just slips this by and he's like, yeah, I did this. He's like, do you know what remote viewing is? And I go, yeah, I think I've heard of it. I think, I watched this documentary back in the day with like Soviet psychic spies or something. And he goes, yeah, so I was on this Facebook group of memory, and this sort of hedge fund reached out to me.
Whoa. To
see if I'd be willing to be trained in remote viewing in order to remote view the stock market for them.
No way.
Yeah. And so he tells me this. I'm like, what? This sounds like it sounds like a fiction. But the headhunter who was hired by the hedge fund to train potential new remote viewers, I ended up meeting. So one of them, his name is Brett Stewart. He also remote views for a living, and like, I guess makes enough money to earn a living, So for me, I'm like, that's a really interesting and important thing to say. Like, if remote viewing is real or not, you're like, well, if this guy's
really
making a living off of remote, that's kind of wild.
Yeah.
So it really shifted my perception immediately, but also red flags started popping up because as a magician, I also know, there's so many different factors that factor into this. Is obviously confirmation bias and all these other factors. But I had no idea of anything Stargate, SRI, or any of that. And so I asked him if he could teach me, because they trained him an hour a day for a month.
Yeah.
Before he started doing ARV, associative remote viewing. So basically, you're not actually remote viewing the up or down of the market. You're remote viewing something, a target unknown to you. And there are 2 targets, actually. And whatever your session is closest to, that image has a relationship like up or down that you don't know about. So that you're not actually remote viewing the stock market, and you're never told whether you're right or wrong. So there's no like positive feedback loop or whatever that is. So anyways, he teaches me this. We start documenting it because I'm like, this could be cool for the channel. It's something I've always been interested in this sort of space. And we start getting really crazy results, like good results. Like you're like, whoa, there might be something here. And over and over and over again, it's just not to be ignored. There's just something. It's like even the general gestalt of a lot of these viewings were correct, where it's like, oh, it's a building. And then I describe, and yeah, sure enough, it's a building, or it's a, a life form or whatever that is. And so start to document this, go through the whole process. And by the end of it, I had created this like whole documentary, and I was like, I can't put this on my magic channel. This is too wild.
Yeah. And
I decided to start a new channel, the Area 52, and then that just led me down a rabbit hole. So long story. That's how I got into it.
That's amazing. Well, I'm so grateful you had that experience and it bridged you into this new world. I find that interesting because that's my own experience too, which is I became interested in quote unquote parapsychology before UFOs as well, because I think once you start to think that physics, and physics is a poor compression of what we're talking about, reality is different than what it seems. Then it allows for all sorts of like different consensus realities and timelines, and ones possibly involving extraterrestrials or craft or non-human intelligence. So yeah, that's a really interesting bridge, and it's one that I had as well. Okay, so you start the channel in 2023. What is the biggest thing you feel like you've updated on in the world of UFOs since starting?
Well, I would say like I always so I'd entered this space with a bit of a bias. I kind of had a centered sort of balanced perspective, but I did want to believe that these things were true, and I knew that about myself. So coming into this, I knew that I had to try my best to put that confirmation bias aside and also give it a skeptic's sort of eye, because otherwise I'd just be, misled, and I didn't want that to happen. I also didn't want to become the amazing Randy. Where famously, if people think of magic and they think of UFOs, they think of Amazing Randy. Mm-hmm. He had this show where at first he would give you 10 grand if you proved something paranormal would exist. And by the end of it, it was $1 million. It was $1 million if you could prove anything sort of paranormal or parapsychological or whatever existed. ESP, all these things, in which nobody ever really collected the $1 million. But I always found it unfair watching those shows, because even the energy that I'm not saying that anyone that did his show had any ability. I just thought they got off on the wrong foot. Regardless, I don't think you should approach something with such, intense skepticism. I do think that now it might actually hinder the result somehow. I think that's a possibility, and I just don't want to. I kind of want to leave this space open. So coming into this space, I wanted to have this balanced perspective, never commit to one thing or the other, have my own sort of internal, beliefs, but also be able to set those aside. And I think once I started doing that, I started unraveling in my own sort of view of reality what seems to be this link between consciousness and UFOs and remote viewing. And I started, putting it together sort of myself with all these cases, everything else. And like, for me, I think that's just the most important thing to focus on in the space, is this connection. And I'm not talking about psionics specifically, but like also the government's interest in consciousness is huge.
Yeah.
It is huge. They are hugely interested in it. That is apparent.
Yeah, of course.
If you look at what they did with Stargate, it's 20 years, $20 million. That's a lot of resources. It's a lot of time. And you got to think 20 years, every year they had to go in front of a committee to make sure the budget was approved for the next year.
That's right.
And so Joe McMoneagle would do that. He'd go into a skiff and do some remote viewing, and they'd come away feeling like, well, yeah, I guess we got to keep going.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that's a lot of pressure when you think about that. Because, like, what if you got that session wrong?
Especially for something that would beget such, kind of bizarro optical scrutiny.
Yeah.
You'd think that would be the first thing to cut.
Of course.
The flip of that is like, I'm a skeptic on the outside and I'm saying, well, B-2 bomber is like, $2 billion plus or whatever. So like, why are you only spending $20 million on the most important, question?
Yeah. That's the beauty of it, because all you need is a pen and paper.
Yeah, right. Right.
There's no real, why do you even need 20 million?
What do you need?
Like,
totally.
It's, it's the cheapest form of intel.
Yeah.
And what was interesting in 96 was like this Dateline thing where they came out and said like, oh, it's not real, like it's real, but like we had this program, but honestly, it never really gave us anything, and the results were whatever. And he says something kind of like he lied by omission a little bit, where he goes something to the effect of, we never used remote viewing as a credible single source of intel or whatever. It was something to that effect, but the idea was that you wouldn't use any
mode of intel as a single source.
Exactly.
It would always have to corroborate something else.
Correct.
It's always an overlay on top of like other sources and methods.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the value in remote viewing for the government. They're not going to use remote viewing to, find a hostage purely on remote viewing. They're going to give you coordinates of where they think the hostage is, and then they're going to remote view possibly how many guards there are in that building guarding the hostages, so it'll never be like, hey, where's the Holy Grail? And then they go dig up in the desert where the Holy Grail is. They'll always have some other piece of intel, whether it's satellite footage or witness or whatever it is, before the remote viewing comes in. And so, I think for how little you're spending, you would be absolutely stupid not to use it.
I've heard many remote viewers talk about it like you're viewing a bunch of possible alternative timelines, like almost like the wave function in physics or whatever. And there's some probability that you're going to end up on the one that you have remote viewed or predicted, but you have to take it sort of loosely. And then there's obviously the analytical overlay where you get a download, but you shouldn't necessarily be the one interpreting your download. Somebody should be kind of intellectually scrutinizing it. And, it seems like there are all these methods or failure modes rather for it. But there's a woman named Jessica Utz who ran the American Statistical Society, and she looked at all of the data, for Stargate, the psychic spy program that ran that you're talking about from the 70s to the 90s. And she looked at the whole thing, and along with Ray Hyman, who is actually a James Randi colleague and fellow skeptic at the University of Oregon. And Utz came out saying if basically she used p-value, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
It was highly elevated.
Beyond. Yeah. She was like, if we were to apply this scrutiny to any other field of science, it would be beyond, the p-values would be way, less than expected as far as, the probability that you'd get hits this many times. So yeah, it's fascinating. We sort of look at that, and
the goalpost shifts.
And you just say, no, you're wrong. The
it's
data
impossible.
must be wrong.
We have to do another one.
You have to do another one. And the other interesting thing that you kind of touched on is like you talked about James Randi in the world in which parapsychology is true. And there is some sort of mind-matter interaction. We don't live in this perfectly Cartesian dualist, separation of mind-matter thing. Inherently, a skeptic coming to the experiment is going to affect the results. And that's why it has to be this almost epistemological paradigm shift, not a scientific paradigm shift, because that involves a priori skepticism.
Yeah.
And so you're going to affect, and it's crazy. And then you end up in this thing where it's like, you can't affect the results as an experimenter. I'm like, but actually you can.
Yeah.
But if there is an effect, of course you can.
Yeah.
So it's this sort of like endless kind of loop. There's Princeton had its own parapsychology lab, the Paralab.
Yep.
And they had this global consciousness project or whatever, where random event generators were tested. So these sort of binary computers tied to something random in quantum mechanics, and they would go off at certain moments.
Yeah,
so like 9/11
was the biggest spike they've ever seen.
Exactly. But they would also go off when Bob John, formerly dean of the engineering school, when he died. And so it was clear in that case, it was the opposite experimenter effect, where in their mind, Bob John dying was as important as 9/11, or like, somewhat as important. Yeah. And so it just goes to show, I think, you end up with all this muddiness.
Yeah.
And it actually, you have to kind of change your paradigm wholesale.
Yeah. Even studying it becomes very difficult in that case, and that's like, even if you, again, taking like, the James Randi sort of, because a lot of people are like, well, if those like telepathy tape kids, if those kids are psychic, why don't they just collect $1 million from James Randi? Like, well, you have to understand that those tests aren't in a vacuum either.
Yeah.
Like those don't live up to any scientific standards.
No.
It's a game show.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there's so much personal bias involved that like that would never be accepted as a fair result.
Absolutely.
Either way.
Absolutely. And if you were to tell, like, or to say, an electron exists, like nobody would argue. And then I say, have you detected an electron? And nobody would have detected an electron. Yeah. And then you say like, oh, your mind can somehow, in a statistically significant way, we don't know how it works, but affect, what's supposed to be a random output because it's tied to something in quantum mechanics. It's supposed to be random. You'd say, no, that's impossible. But it's just your bias.
Yes.
There's literally nothing about an electron measurement that you are like, you should be higher conviction in than this other thing.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And even if you look at Stargate, they had to, so Dr. Edwin May, who was the chief research physicist, had to put together a scientific oversight committee for Stargate, right? Made up of I think a dozen of the best minds in America. Like you had Dr. Daryl Bem was part of that, renowned parapsychological researcher. And you had Dr. Schwartz, who invented the neutrino beam or something. He won a Nobel Prize. You had a doctor, was it Zimbardo, who's the guy who did the Stanford prison experiment.
Zimbardo, yeah.
So you had like this like who's who of scientists. But the main thing that he said was like, there's just one rule. You have to come into this skeptic. We have to. So they together created the kind of protocol in how to measure these p-values in these tests. And they had 6 remote viewers over sort of, data. He has data of 6 remote viewers over 30 years. That's a lot of data. So they have all of this data with these, with these people, and they had to like sort of map out, how do we effectively test them? Because there's so many variables to consider when you're drawing, a building. Like, okay, if I have a building and I just draw like the target is a building and I draw just like a rectangle, what is that? How do you quantify that? How do you put that on a number scale? Well, does the building have windows? Now, if you're drawing windows, and now the windows, right? And so like maybe the ratio to a person in the building for the height. So there's all these little tiny factors that they would have to factor in, because otherwise confirmation bias could be like, yeah, rectangle, it's a building. He got it. 10 on 10, right? So they really had to be skeptical and be like, look, we have to draw that line in a way that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt. And I think, Dr. May wrote together with, other collaborators over 2 million words on that, right? And you have all the hits and the misses. It's not like he's only showing you the good results. You have the bad results too, but if you consider the p-value and the amount of times they got something right and the high accuracy, it almost makes you think they're cheating sometimes when you look at the results. You're like, how?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I've been with McMonagle and experienced it myself, where it's like a friend of mine drew like a little spiky thing and it was a pineapple, and it's like, and the pineapple was in this manila envelope that McMonagle had brought. And you're like, this feels like magic. Like, it's insane. What the hell is going on? And this wasn't even this is McMonagle teaching us the method in like a 10-minute period.
Yeah.
So it's so fascinating. I think if you were to audit anybody's kind of day-to-day, experience, they would say they experience all sorts of things like this. And then I think what something like that needs to turn into mainstream science is you need to be able to put math behind it, and you need to make it repeatable, like very repeatable. And I think we don't know how to do either. I think the repeatability it's still like loose enough where it's it's not like, every time I drop this pen, it drops to the ground, like, not like gravity or whatever. And it's hard to put math to it.
It's hard to quantify that. Yeah.
It's hard to quantify it, but it doesn't make it less of a very real and measurable anomaly.
Definitely.
That will likely point to a future kind of scientific paradigm, because they always do.
Yeah. But they are doing interesting things to support more accurate results. So they're finding ways to enhance the results. And, by doing tests over and over and over and over with the same people, you're able to map out, what works and what doesn't. And really interesting findings. One was, when they originally found these remote viewers, they'd basically reached out to 600 individuals and tested them, 1% of which turned out to have a significant talent in remote viewing. But these people ranged from all walks of life, but like Mensa level geniuses. You had Stanford alumni in there. You had intelligence people. You had civilians. And out of all these people, out of 600 people, 6 people were chosen to have significant talent. Now, 6 out of 600 doesn't seem like much. That's 1% of the population. That's quite a bit when you think about it. And
of a very elite pool to begin with.
Correct. Yeah. Well, elite, but it also had all sorts of people in there at the end. It wasn't just, super geniuses or anything.
Sure.
It didn't matter.
Yeah.
It was these other factors. And one of those factors was these people, they found out afterwards, all had synesthesia.
That's amazing. So these are the original people picked for Stargate.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
They all had synesthesia.
Yes.
For the audience, synesthesia is the kind of entanglement or coupling of senses. So like every time you hear a particular note, you see a color or something. Like Kanye West, I think, or Pharrell have like,
or you could smell a sound, or like it's the mixing of senses, how your brain interprets 2 different senses. Those people apparently have pretty had the best results.
Well, there's a woman named Dr. Ia Whitley. She's a space psychologist, and she works on with astronauts and fighter pilots for their like sort of space readiness or like high performance environments. But on the side, and maybe this is not on the side, maybe this is related to her core work. So babies apparently are all born with synesthesia.
Oh, right.
And 6 months in, they lose synesthesia. And so she is working on modalities to help babies and children retain their synesthesia for longer. Because I'm sure you lose all sorts of perceptive awareness in the process, all of what you're talking about right now, where if there's a correlation between that and remote viewing, maybe you come out of the womb with more of these latent abilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're, also closer to the source, kind of, right? You're coming right out of that. And I mean, that is really interesting, especially when you tie it back to these nonverbal autistic children, where a lot of them also are synesthetes.
Yes.
So there is, it is interesting to think that, hey, if there's a way to induce synesthesia or to preserve it or to train it, or to just nurture it naturally, even, that might lead to better results in the psi sort of sphere.
Yes.
Another really interesting part is entropy is a big factor in these results as well. The more entropy something has, the more accurate the session is.
That's fascinating because there's even a term called syntropy in biology, which is biological systems, their attraction to order and to non-entropic systems. One of the greatest neuroscientists of our time is a guy named Carl Friston. He has the free energy principle, and neurons are literally attracted to lower entropy systems. You can randomize signals and make neurons, train them to do things through Pavlovian conditioning because that's seen as punishment for them. So that's just fascinating that that we're sort of attracted to order, and then maybe you're more likely to view something that is disordered.
Yeah, and the reason for that might be also that our brains are kind of hardwired to detect change, right? And so if you look at the Ganzfeld experiments, for example, you're basically numbing your senses. You're kind of in a sensory deprivation thing due to having like a red light in your face for 10 or 15 minutes. Eventually, because it hasn't changed at all, your brain perceives it as black. You just won't see it anymore. And then that white noise you're listening to after about 10 or 15 minutes ceases to be heard as well, because your brain's it's kind of like if you walk into a room and you can smell something, like in your house, you're like, what does that smell? And a half an hour later, it's gone. You don't smell it anymore. You get used to it. Your brain tends to not detect it if there's no entropy, if there's no change. And so on perhaps a quantum field level, we're also hardwired to detect change, which makes it a lot easier to remote view places that have nuclear energy or bombs or, anything regarding someone's life, because that apparently has a big entropic sort of correlation as well, that the loss of life or the endangerment of life actually allows the remote viewers to have a more accurate viewing, which is why like hostage situations or like finding missing children, those things are all really, really easier to remote view. They used to douse target sites with liquid nitrogen, and they would get more accurate results when they did that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating because it creates local entropy.
Correct.
Well, it makes so much. I've always thought there was an interesting angle there with the nuclear stuff, because often with nuclear spills, there's this woman named Jensine Andreessen, Harvard PhD, who documents a lot of these nuclear disasters and how UFOs show up consistently around the nuclear disaster. So, I mean, there aren't that many at this point, but like the two kind of most staple ones would probably be Fukushima in 2011 and then Chernobyl in the 90s.
Yeah.
And in both cases, people see the UFOs come down and seemingly clean up the radiation. And there's all this interesting novel work in science right now being done. There's a guy named Michael Levin at Tufts. Talks about bioelectricity and the bioelectric field of the body, and how basically the electromagnetic field biological system is growing up in dictates its morphology in a more fundamental way than what he calls the hardware, which is just the DNA and the proteins. And so you have this software writing, like this coding going on from the environment itself. And you have to think, if a nuke goes off, it totally messes with that. And radiation accelerates evolution. Like if you look at in Chernobyl now, you have like mutated dogs and frogs, and because it's just differential selection plus mutation. So like the more mutations you get, the more various selection.
Happens,
and then on the flip side, you can kind of stagnate. You put a frog embryo in a Faraday cage and it doesn't grow properly. So there's something about the magnetosphere of the Earth that is almost like this perfect petri dish for life.
Correct.
And if you're like this UFO like monitoring the thing, you freak out when like you see this like high entropy spike.
Correct.
You go. And then I'm sure like same with our remote viewing abilities.
And I think that's why we have them in a sense. Like this isn't new. We're kind of rediscovering this perhaps intuitive sense, but perhaps to them, they're hardwired in a way to be way more receptive to that. So they don't have to hang around maybe. Maybe they could be on the other side of the universe and they get this entropic spike and they just know that they got to like, boop, show up, take care of business, right? And almost like a fail safe.
Yeah.
And so maybe genetically somehow we inherited that from whatever theory of life you want to put to that. But I think that maybe that's just like a fundamental part of also survival.
Yeah.
So if you look at like, because obviously extraterrestrials, this is like, we think of this as like the peak evolution of humankind, perhaps, or of living entity. You become really attached to this quantum field, and therefore you can have all these amazing abilities like telepathy and remote viewing, and perhaps bilocation and all these amazing things, right? But on a lower scale, which would be like us or even our ancestors. We kind of only have that when necessary for survival. It's like the very bottom of it. But it would probably be used, and Joe McMoneagle talks a lot about that too. It'd probably be used to like know where to dig for water, or know where to set up camp, or know where not to go at night, or what food to eat. Like, how did the shaman know not to eat this mushroom? Oh, the mushroom told me. Like, he had this like intuitive instinct. They wouldn't just eat it and then die and be like, don't eat the mushrooms here.
Yep.
They would know. They would like tell people, no, the plants are speaking to me. And that's kind of how and so there is this like sense of, I do think there is a very, very fundamental psi ability in everybody when it comes to survival. And that's why we experience things like this during high stress environments, because we're triggering something that perhaps allows us to, in some precognitive way, know what's going to happen a second before it does, before we get hit in the face or shot, or like, so I think we still have that innate ability. But then there are these mutations in people's physiology that allow them to have, access to these synesthesia properties that allow them to have a little bit more, and I think it's really interesting. And I don't know if whether the autism thing that we're experiencing, I think you touched on this too, is perhaps related to this. Like, what is this? Is this, why are we seeing more of these cases now? Is this just some type of weird evolution, or is this, is this bad? Is this good? It's just interesting.
Oh, it's so fascinating. And I think our world now, is kind of an anomaly compared to the past, where we have sanitization, we have safety, but really, we were constantly under duress, stress, and there's sort of predators and safety concerns constantly in the past. And especially, evolution occurs along, a couple of different tracks. You have individual selection, sexual selection, but you also have group selection. And often in a group, you have a person who is selected for who might not be selected for on an individual level. And they're selected for more if the group is under duress. So geniuses are often asexual. They're not super social. They're maladaptive in all these other ways. And if you talk to Joseph McMoneagle, remote viewer number one, he'll say that shamans in the past were often very sickly And, on an individual level, not the most vital or likely to kind of, move their genes forward, but really selected for by the group because they led the group into,
they were fed, they were brought medicine because they would also provide that service to the rest of the group, which is like these precognitive things or these readings.
It's totally adaptive to get these downloads that where if the whole world is sort of a search space, like it's like, what is the likelihood you're going to come up with the vine that's DMT rich and the, MAO inhibitor or whatever? That needs to come from some different epistemic pathway than like trial and error, Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hours. It does. And if that exists at all, it's going to be selected for in those paradigms or contexts when you're sort of in the dark and you're like with a little clan of people. And I think that just exists sort of less. And the other kind of mental model to have around it is that maybe we are ported into these low-level senses, a la Plato. Like we are in a cave. And, Plato would say, don't trust your senses. There's a higher world of kind of, ideas and kind of Platonic ideals up here.
Yes.
That supersede the world of forms. And when you see these kids, these nonverbal autistic kids in the telepathy tapes, remote view, they need to be situated in their bodies, which if you think of like a VR headset, you need to like see your hands and then you're like in it. And you're like, okay, I'm good. I'm in the VR thing. I'm ported in. And if you don't, you're still like in some other kind of liminal realm.
Yeah.
And being in that liminal realm might give you more access to the primordial stuff, to that different epistemic circuit where you get the downloads. Yep. And that feels like them. They're disembodied in some ways, but they're connected to like more primordial, knowledge as well. What is up, alchemists? If you're interested in joining group calls with me and accessing exclusive, never before seen episodes of American Alchemy, like my walk and talk with Danny Sheehan on who exactly killed JFK, or a remote viewing debate between Hal Puthoff and Eric Weinstein, then please join our WAP community today. We've been sitting on a ton of unreleased footage that we will now be releasing on our new WAP. I also hosted a discussion between the infamous Jack Sarfati and former American alchemist Science Bob McGuire. Head over to wap.com/Jesse Michels, Michels with no A, to become a member today. That's wap.com/JESSEMICHELS. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of today's episode.
Kind of like, these are like the avatars that we sort of inhibit, and they can function autonomously.
Yep.
They don't need, like, our bodies, I don't think, need the consciousness to survive. I think that you have a brain for that, and you have, a heart for that, and a stomach for that. The consciousness is kind of what's driving everything. But I do think, like, on a survival basis, like, we jump back to using the physicalness to help us sort of, navigate this planet. But yeah, definitely that's, why we get these quote unquote downloads through meditation, through astral projection, through dreams. These are all states that you don't need your body for. And, your body is, I think your brain, uses time and uses all these things to help it survive. But I think that we're getting to a point in our evolution where survival isn't like an imminent factor in our daily lives. We live I'm not speaking for everyone, obviously, but in the Western world, there's, we live very comfortably. And so because of that, now it seems like perhaps these innate abilities that come from, a higher consciousness are now seeming to present themselves a little bit more. Perhaps because of this comfort, we're allowing ourselves to leave our bodies now. We don't have to babysit the physical body anymore. And we're kind of, experimenting with these DMTs and these everything else to try and, get what's out there in a more meaningful way and in a less stress-induced environment. I think, like, because, you hear these Jake Barbers that say, like, oh, it's stress inoculation and, like, you got to be under high stress for this thing to happen. And I'm like, I think that's probably a way of doing it. And of course, like, you probably get some results. But I think it's really important that we work perhaps towards a way of achieving that through other emotional states, because I think it might be it might take a lot more work and a lot more studying, at less instant results, like than zapping someone and telling them, what do you see? Is maybe meditating for a year, an hour every day for a year and seeing what happens then. Or trying, I'm not saying trying drugs, but like, experimenting safely with these other alternative psychedelics to see if there's something there. I think definitely we should be leaning a little bit more into that than leaning into the fear side of it. That's just intuitively what I think. It might help you survive, but I don't think it really helps you connect.
Yeah.
In a meaningful way.
Yeah. So if UFOs show up, in high entropy systems where it's like they have to restore the order around kind of radiation or nuclear spills, I feel like another pattern, again, in the UFO world where it's so hard to find actually patterns, it's so confusing, is they seem to show up around people in particular states of consciousness. And we were at a party the other night, and some friends of mine brought up this Hyperion sci-fi trilogy or something. I might be botching this, but in it, apparently, according to them, we're like, flames that like little nodes that light up, and like a moth to a flame, they see when people reach certain levels of consciousness. Do you think that the UFOs sort of exist in that way where it's sort of high entropy with, trying to clean up the nuclear spills, but then also they are attracted to people who seem like they are lighting up consciousness wise?
Yeah, I think that could be the case, and I don't want to generalize because I also do think we might not be dealing with one entity here.
Yep.
And so there could be a plethora of outcomes here and reasons why we're being visited, or we could have been conditioned and manipulated genetically to do that. So it's no surprise to them. They're not coming from that far. They're just kind of like, oh, finally, they're doing the thing. I often think it's interesting, but I often think that, like, we place ourselves in kind of the center of our own universe, obviously, from our perspective, and we do assume that there is life out there. You'd be an idiot not to assume that there's intelligent life in this universe other than us, I think. However, if you were able to use the type of technology that they are using, which is seemingly almost instantaneous travel through time and space, like these warping of gravity and manipulating of space-time where they can just appear and disappear, you'd be able to bounce around and see an infinite number of exoplanets, right? And if you consider that we are where we're going right now, our human trajectory is showing us that we have people like Elon Musk who want to get past this barrier and preserve life by spreading our seed onto other planets in the solar system and eventually out into the galaxy. If that is our goal for humanity, I'd like to fast forward that, and I'd think it's pretty depressing that we end up just constantly living underground elsewhere. Because even all of these exoplanets, there's never going to be the perfect gravity or the perfect radiation levels or carbon dioxide, or there's always going to be something that's going to kill you, right? Because you didn't grow there. And so you're constantly be wearing suits or living in a bubble. And it just doesn't seem like a really good way to preserve your species. And so I think that if you were able to bounce around the universe and find all these exoplanets, it would be a lot easier and make way more sense if we were to find the native life that already inhabited these planets and simply manipulate our genetic code into theirs so that way we could live there. Maybe not me personally, but my ancestors or something. And so we'd start jumping around the universe instantly to maybe 100,000 exoplanets all at the same time, and then grabbing a plant from here, changing it up a bit, dropping it over here, and doing the same with human life or whatever type of life you find there, and like experimenting. Perhaps on this planet, we're going to, insert a little bit more of this consciousness attracting, genetic system into a lizard. and see how that turns out.
Mm-hmm.
And then do that with apes, and then do that with birds, or, and try all these different things out. And then every 1,000 years pop back and introduce agriculture or irrigation systems or metallurgy or religion and language, and just kind of like see how these things are all seeding and how they're all, sort of growing together. And then, I mean, this is going really deep and far, but I also think that if you were able to manipulate gravity in such a way, let's say I didn't have a home planet, and you could just like tune your craft to like a higher density or something, and just create like a essential little black hole around your craft, and fast forward 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So essentially you could go through the whole evolution of our entire known universe and the seeding of it in an afternoon, it wouldn't change anything. If you don't have any loved ones at home waiting for you and you're just in a craft locally, then time is of no consequence. Like what happens on the outside of that craft doesn't change what happens on the inside.
Yep.
So why wouldn't you just do something, fast forward, keep doing it, fast forward, and literally like, it's like hitting the X button when you're playing a video game to like, skip past all the cutscenes.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I think. Why wouldn't you do it that way? Why would you wait?
Mm-hmm.
It sounds so weird if you can manipulate time.
Yeah.
And so it just, I just think that like, and then you hear these high Michels and like the Galactic Federation, they're here to stop our nukes. We hear that all the time. We catch some of them picking up samples and putting them on their ships through these. And so this all feels like this zoo, but not in a way that's like a zoo, but like in a way that's like the preservation of like the seed of life throughout the universe.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like that's what's happening. Like if you look at all the signs.
No, it's so fun. I mean, like Elon Musk always says, we have to preserve the tiny candle flickering in the darkness of human consciousness. But then you think about, at one time I had the very great honor of meeting Werner Herzog, who like spent a lot of time with Elon, and he was like, great German documentarian.
Great narrator.
Amazing narrator. Amazing. In fact, when I met him, his son went to college with me and introduced me to Werner. And I was like, how was Simon, his son? And he goes, oh, Simon, injured his hand, like in his like typical German, I'm going to botch it. But he starts narrating his son's like, basically like
he
cut
fell
off
his
one of his
bicycle.
yes.
And when he came to the ground, his hand was broken.
yes. And he kept going super descriptive in that monotone, like Grizzly Man style, like and
feeling
his
the pain of his hand. He couldn't go.
Yeah. I was like, oh, I hope he feels better.
Imagine him reading you bedtime stories at night, eh? It's wild. Him or Morgan Freeman.
Exactly. So I spent a little bit of time with him, and he was like, I think he really admired Elon. They spent some time together, but he was like, what are you gonna do on Mars? Like, you're gonna like put yourself in a telephone booth, an oxygenated telephone booth? Like, he was like, this isn't realistic. This is crazy.
Yeah.
Not only from the standpoint of, I always point out, as I'm sure you do and others in the UFO world, that like the chemical combustion thing is a fool's errand. Like literally like using like physics as we know it, like Newtonian laws, doesn't make any sense. Just if you look at biological life time scales to get to the next level. Even this idea of the Kardashev scale is, you have, a single planet, species, you have a multi-planet species, multi-solar system species, multi-galaxy species. It's all couched under that species' ability to harness energy.
Yep.
Can you harness the energy of your planet? Can you harness the energy, Dyson sphere of the sun or whatever? That itself is probably extremely limited by our frameworks.
Yes.
And so it's probably something way more like consciousness. If there is any separation between soul and body, it's obviously adaptive to not like be stuck in like a meat suit if you're traveling elsewhere.
Correct. Yeah.
And I think the other thing that you said that I find very fascinating is like, there could be a whole plethora of things going on. If you admit that there are, one faction of aliens, the answer is probably not one at that point. It's kind of 0 to infinity.
Yes.
Absolutely. Like the likelihood that there is just one species that's reached you is much lower than like, again, it's either 0. The Fermi paradox is like, it somehow is a paradox, or much more
It's
than
everything. Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah. What's the thing in Star Trek? It's called like the was it the first protocol, or what is
the prime directive.
The prime directive.
Yeah.
I feel like that has some truth to it as well.
Oh, for sure.
Like where they're waiting for us to get to a certain point, and it's like I find if I were this like omnipotent ruling being who is able to create life and generate consciousness within these complex life forms, and sort of am intelligent enough to manipulate all of this and to watch it grow and to like be the seeder of life throughout the universe, seeing Elon build these, gas propelled sort of ships and trying to make it to like this desolate dead planet to seed life, I'd be like, aw, cute, right? It's kind of like when I watch a crow use a stick to get his food.
Yeah.
Right? Where I'm like, you're on the right track, buddy.
Yeah.
You're doing it.
Yeah.
Good job. You're so cute and smart.
Yeah.
But I do think like, anything we can think of has probably already been thought of in the universe and in the grand sort of scale of where information lives. I don't think we're making anything new. And so,
no.
all of this whole process of trying, I think is cute. But I ultimately think that if that's the goal, then someone had already achieved it in the universe. It's like if this world were to disappear tomorrow, we'd come up with the same math formulas if a new one appeared.
Yeah.
Like, so where does that come from, right? Information is in a cloud. It's all around us. It's sort of omnipresent. And so we're not really inventing anything. We're just kind of just rediscovering things all the time. And if that's true, then fast forward it all and it probably already exists. And so therefore, we're probably already being observed by these things. And they're just kind of like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
What they're doing.
And then maybe when somebody lights up along the vector they care about, the consciousness thing, they take note.
Yes.
And they take an interest.
Yeah.
Speaking of the Elon thing, there are all these rumors. You did an amazing piece on Chris Bledsoe. I recommend everybody check out.
Thank you.
This guy in North Carolina, he had some very anomalous experiences involving beings in a craft, and he started to get visited by all these higher ups at NASA and the CIA. What do you make of these rumors that NASA is more than meets the eye, and that actually the history of rocketry is much stranger than we think? You have like stories of Jack Parsons, the founder of the American rocket program, saying, basically implying he was in touch with other intelligence, along with Tchaikovsky, the Russian equivalent. Werner von Braun was definitely a very trippy guy. And
I think if you rewind even more so, you get into the Nazis' infatuation with the occult as well, right? And where did a lot of those Nazis end up? After through paperclip and through
running our space program.
Yeah, exactly. Running our space programs and Overcast as well, right? And so like Lord knows where those people are.
Yeah.
So in other denominations and factions of the government, but so you have to think that like that was some type of weird tradition that those sort of Nazis were doing back in the day. First, they were kind of already, and then like rewind further back, and the further you go back, the more that this stuff becomes really, really relevant. And I don't think it just ever went away. I don't think this is new that like NASA's doing this.
Yeah. So what do you make it? Do you believe like Diana Pasulka, wrote some amazing books on UFOs. She's a religious studies professor. She talks about 2nd century Latin being written.
Yeah. Like old Latin.
Old Latin. I think on the rocket.
The rockets,
like the fairing or something. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I looked into a lot of those patches actually, which was really interesting. Like they have these launch patches, these mission patches at NRO, and a lot of them are just kind of morale boosters. And I was even trying to figure out like who's designing these. And for the main part, it's the crew. The crew are the ones that are in charge of what the patches are and the missions are. So sometimes you'll see little Easter eggs in those patches with like crew initials and that type of thing. And then other times, you'll see like kind of more esoteric or occult, depictions. Yeah.
You do an amazing, and like in almost all of your episodes, you do like a patch review.
Yeah. The earlier ones. Yeah. We do a lot of those. Yeah.
And they're fantastic. And some of them are so strange. It's like the devil is the devil is better than the devil you don't or something. And it's like, why are you writing this? Or like, you talk about Misty Echo, which I think you tweeted, on the, I think it was an Area 51 patch. It's and it's like an egg
with
and like a lady inside
glowing,
the egg.
flying.
And you ask the question, are you just totally messing with us? Or, and it's like this hilarious inside joke, or is there something to it?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think it's both. I think sometimes it's one, sometimes it's the other, sometimes it's more. But if you listen to Diana Pasulkin, she talks about this a lot, about the ritualistic sort of performative rituals that they do prior to launching, like wearing the same type of clothes or standing in a certain spot or eating a certain food or whatever that is. There's these minor rituals.
Yep.
And I think the way that she kind of puts it is that the math on rocket launching, it has to be so accurate. Like the physics on it and everything has to line up so almost divinely, because if there's a hair off of any one of these components, and all of these compartmentalized components, by the way, like when you're working, this isn't just UFOs. When you're working at a rocket company, you're compartmentalized. You don't know what part this goes to. You just have to make it do the one thing they're asking. It'd be much easier if they could tell you what it's for, but they don't, right? So all of these things have to line up. That's so precise, like no deviation. And so they think that, well, why not also line that up, the spiritual? And so part of me understands that. Like if you're working with stuff that's so precise, lives are in danger a lot of times. You know what I mean? And a lot of money's on the line, and a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. Like, I don't see the difference between that and praying.
Oh yeah, no.
So I do think there is like this divine alignment that now the question is there a data set that shows a significant difference?
Yeah. Well, I think both of us would say the data set is just parapsychology or something. It's like the random event generator stuff. Like if your mind and its orientation has any impact on reality.
Right, exactly. So doing these rituals probably amplifies that positive outlook towards the outcome, and thus maybe collapses the wave function in that particular way. So there might be something to it. I do think everything is balanced. And, there was an interesting thing that Chris Bledsoe said, that he was told as well, is that like, they were like, why do our rockets get shot? Like they're not getting launched out there. And he asked, are there weapons on them? And they said, yeah. And he goes, that's why. That's why it's not working. They don't want it to work. That's what he said. So, I don't know whether there's any truth to that.
Yeah.
But I think maybe the, intention is obviously a very important factor in Psy.
Yeah.
And I think in life.
And outcomes in life.
Correct.
Absolutely.
And so if the intent is to harm, defend or attack regardless, I think that maybe you would need to, sort of align yourself elsewhere. So that it happens. Yeah. You have to balance it out.
So like align yourself with bad factions to make it work. If
possibly.
It's more,
who knows?
Interesting. Yeah. It's really fascinating. I mean, even you can watch like, Countdown to Launch about SpaceX, and Gwynne Shotwell, who's the COO of SpaceX, who basically runs it at this point. She's like, I wear my special shoes, for launch or whatever. Like everybody in that world does have a ritual. And Jack Parsons actually read this book called The Golden Bough by J.G. Fraser, this 19th century anthropologist. And that book involves hermetic magical rituals among indigenous tribes. And they engage in two forms of magic: homeopathic magic and sympathetic magic. Homeopathic magic, I'm sure you're somewhat familiar with these concepts, is like, I believe, the likeness of, an object you're trying to affect. So it's like a voodoo doll or something. And sympathetic magic is like, hair, teeth, and nails, like literally like stuff from the thing you're trying to affect. So all of this seems like kind of this, weird witchcraft or whatever. But J.G. Fraser, this anthropologist, notices that when these tribes encounter kind of enlightenment, skepticism, and thought, the rituals lose their power.
Right.
And Jack Parsons read that book and he came out saying, I believe that science is a form of magic. Magic is not a form of science, which you being a magician, I don't know how you feel about that, because we've gone back and forth on, and you're like, there are all sorts of things that seem like sort of totally remarkable. And you're like, yeah, but like I could tell you how to do that. And then there are other things where you're like, but given the right circumstances for a magician, like magicians are more likely to encounter sort of miracles as well.
Yeah.
So like, how do you reconcile? That's so fascinating.
Yeah. No, I am kind of torn on that, because on one hand, I do believe that everything can be explained prosaically.
Mm-hmm.
As a magician, that is my job,
mm-hmm.
to deconstruct something. So my job is to make the impossible seem real, right? And it's a very strange and hard thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, we would start with the effect, which is the moment of astonishment the spectator would feel, and then work backwards from there, right? So what the effect is, let's say, okay, you want the effect to be 100 people seeing a UFO appear in the sky. Okay, so the method that I'm thinking, like there's so many methods that I can go back to, is okay, there's technology. Obviously, we can involve some type of like hologram technology. We can amplify that using probably sound as well, even like some type of vibration. We can then amplify that. We can probably mask some of that as well if it was nighttime, right? Obviously, you can get away with a lot more at night. Maybe in the middle of the night, if we wake these people up, they'll be a little bit more susceptible to using their imagination and being in like this dream state. Perhaps these people as well are more inclined to believe something like this. Before we get into it, let's survey the area and try to find people who would be more inclined to believe in something like this. So when you start deconstructing things as a magician, you can create the reality, right? You create the framework for what they believe is real.
Yeah.
And that's what Psy Op is too. It's the exact same thing.
That's literally where my mind went. It's like, if you were perpetrating a Psy Op in this area, you'd look for like these specific traits around like high impressionability.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this person's like just really susceptible to sort of being tricked.
Yeah.
And then like, but also like really good like communicator or something.
Yeah. Or you might also like for months ahead, be dropping little hints here and there around town. Have somebody say, I saw this weird light the other night. Or have this newspaper article, that or a horoscope that says, hey, you're going to see something in the sky, and like all these things that you could just plant, psychologically to prime the moment of astonishment.
So when you hear of a story like, Fatima, Portugal, like 1917, these three orphans get this sort of, prophecy that, the Virgin Mary is going to come, and then these lights in the sky appear among like 100+ people or whatever. Does your mind immediately go to Psy Op, or does it go to maybe something happened, or you just don't know?
I don't always think Psy Op.
Yeah.
I think that we Psy Op ourselves sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Using imagination and what we want to see. Now, again, I think everything can have a prosaic explanation. I don't believe that the prosaic explanation is what happened. But everything can have a prosaic explanation. So that's why, when I see people like Mick West debunking things, I'm like, yeah, I can do that too.
Totally.
Everybody can do that. It's as a magician, I know a ton of methods.
Yeah.
More methods than Mick West knows, I can guarantee you, to trick the eye.
Yeah.
And to trick the senses.
Yeah.
It's, I've been studying it for a very long time. So yes, it's not hard to fake anything.
Yeah.
Period. But what we have to look at is that what's happening?
Yeah.
And, in some cases, I think it might be. And in some cases, I think it might not be. I think the prosaic explanation in some cases is just a flying saucer.
Yeah.
I think that's the, maybe it's not an angel.
Yeah.
Because in that case, that would be the prosaic explanation. If you think it's an angel, it's actually nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
It's less romantic. It's not that, and so depending on your paradigm, like that, your view of prosaic changes as well. But, that specific case is really interesting because there were so many witnesses. And some witnesses were on camera saying what they saw. So it does sound like an object.
Yeah.
But there is an absolute difference between these prophetic messages from this lady and this round, whizzing, rainbow-colored object darting around the sky and then eventually went back to the sun or whatever, looking like the sun. This is two different things.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing the same thing. If it was a lady darting around the sky like this, then I'd be like, all right, that's, kind of like the same thing here we're talking about, but it's not. We're talking about some type of figure that came to these, and now we're talking about this erratic physical object in the sky, right? Are they correlated? Perhaps, and like maybe this is like a Bledsoe thing where, there was some extraterrestrial stuff, then there was like this prophetic imagery and this presence of a female entity. I don't know. I don't know. There's just not enough data there I would love to, interview some of those people, but even then, memory is completely fallible and is the worst piece of evidence. It is the most compelling for me because I love hearing people's experience. And I think, looking them in the eye, you can tell if someone's being truthful. But what that truth is, I think, is subjective. As a magician, our job is not only to fool you using visual senses or auditory senses, or touch or smell or anything, but also we fool you using memory. We engineer memory. And that is a big sort of secret that most magicians, they're, I guess, kind of aware of it. They just don't kind of give it any thought.
Yep.
But the engineering of memory is very important to an experience. And so what a magician will do, and again, like it sounds like I'm talking about Psy Op, by the way. And I want to preface that, like, it is almost one and the same thing. But it's if you were on a moral scale, Psy Op would be over here and a magic trick would be over here. So like we're using the same techniques. That moment of astonishment you feel when seeing a magic trick, if you were to put that on a negative scale, that would be a Psy Op.
Right.
Right. So we're using the same methodry, but we're using it for noble purposes of entertainment only.
Yeah.
For instance, as an example, if I handed you something and say, have a look at this. Have a look. Yeah. It's very, very important that you have a look at that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'll take that back.
Okay.
Okay. So here's what we'll do. I want you to imagine this ring just kind of disappearing.
Okay.
All right.
Wow.
So the ring's gone.
Gone.
What's over here? But, yeah. So, in your mind as a spectator, this is very important, right? Because I said this is important. Hold this in your hand. It's important you feel it in your hand, right? Yeah. And then I kind of go, and now I relax. And so this moment is a false transfer, we call it, right? Where it's like it looks like I'm bringing it over here, but it's still over here. Yeah. But I've practiced actually putting it in my hand 1,000 times so that I could just get it to a point where it looks like I'm handling it, but I'm not actually handling it, right? But that moment was so nothing. That was a nothing moment. This is a nothing. You're not going to remember that.
And I de-emphasized it in my head because you said, look at it. This is important.
That's important. And then I put no emphasis on this. And I put all the emphasis here. All the emphasis is over here. Right? None of it was on here, on this moment. Right? And if I did this and kept staring at this hand, you would be suspicious. So it's everything leads you over here, and this is nothing. And so later, when you immediately recall what happened, this is a very basic, simple example. I could give you a better example eventually, but just right now, if you were to recall what happened immediately to someone else, you would say, I saw the ring. I held the ring. I saw him put it in his hand. And when he opened his hand, it was gone. And that's not what happened. Right. So there's like a small lapse in a small little detail that you didn't pick up on. Is that he had it in one hand and he put it into his other hand. He didn't just take it back and it was gone. Right. But that little moment, that non-moment, is not going to be shelved by your brain. Your brain has other things to do. It's not going to start remembering all the useless shit.
Well, and it's sort of adaptive to like not be hyper vigilant about those things.
Yeah, because
like,
I told you it wasn't.
We have like limited space or whatever.
Yeah,
yeah.
I think we have unlimited space, but you're trained to just not
To
store.
compress.
Yeah, because you'd go insane.
Yeah,
if you were to remember every mundane detail of your day.
100%.
And there's some autistic people that can, and they're almost insane.
Yeah, there's like Kim Peek.
Kim
tell
Peek,
you, like,
correct.
The weather on
the
like
Rain Man.
July 27th, 1519, or what, like.
A friend of mine wrote up an algorithm for that, by the way, that I learned, that I committed to memory. I don't do it anymore because you got to practice it.
Whoa.
Yeah, there's an actual like algorithm you can go through in your head to figure out what day you were born. As a magician, he wrote a book on that.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, we're always using like these interesting cases to try and figure out how to like turn it into a magic trick, right? It's just more methods. We love methods, psychology, sleight of hand, all this stuff. We love it. We collect it to create the illusion, because the illusion is never one thing. It's a group of many things, and that's what makes a well-rounded psyop or illusion is these, this well-roundedness. So in this case, you're taking these two really important things, the emphasis of me here and the emphasis of you holding a physical object together. Now it's impossible.
Yeah.
And now you're saying it's in sleeves or it's this. So if I were to roll up my sleeves, you've been like, whoa. And now you're kind of like, no answer. And so you're left, I guess it's impossible. Yeah. I guess it's an anomaly. I guess it's UFOs, right? So this is the same mindset that experiencers have versus someone who sees a magic trick. It's the exact same thing that happens. Now, this isn't to say that what experiencers are seeing or feeling or experiencing isn't real. And it isn't to say what they're saying happened didn't happen. I'm saying there is a lapse in memory instantly after an experience. And an experiencer and someone seeing a magic trick is very, very similar. When you see a magic trick and you want to explain what happened, and magicians know this, we do this at gigs. If we're performing, we'll stick around and we'll like just eavesdrop on someone explaining to someone else what that magic trick, what I just did. And immediately they're saying something so crazy, so impossible.
Yeah.
Like I'm literally Jesus now. Like, and I'm doing these miracles. I'm like, I didn't do that. That's crazy, But I'm a magician. I'm getting paid. I'm like, all right, whatever.
Yeah.
But the truth is that they're embellishing for two reasons, and none of which are like nefarious. None of them are malicious or anything. They don't want to purposely deceive people or lie to people, but there's two reasons they do that. One is because they don't want you to think that they are dumb. They don't want you to think that you didn't consider all the variables, right? So they'll invent variables because they know deep down that was impossible.
Yeah.
But even though they didn't check my sleeves, they'll be like, no, his sleeves were rolled up.
That's fascinating, because I want you to get to number two, but the amount of UFO experiencers I've heard actually downplay the experience. So like retrace the or there's like a public version and a private version where like the public version's like, I saw a thing, I don't know what it is, could have been fake. And then they say it in private and they're like, it answered all these questions for me. I was conflicted beforehand and it telepathically spoke to me. Couldn't say that part on air or whatever,
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and there might be another reason for that too. There is the reason like people don't want to be judged.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So they will, like Betty and Barney Hill, for example, telling the Air Force One story and then telling the psychologist another story. Same story, different details. One of them was more numbers, distance, size, speed, and the other one was more like, no, I felt this, And so there is that too to consider. But the second reason would be you want people to feel what you felt. And that's a very human thing to want. We want to self-express, but that self-expression means we want people to experience what we're trying to express to them. And there's no way of actually doing that. And there's even less of a way of doing that if you just convey the data. Right? So if I tell you, oh, he handed me a ring to look at, he took it back in one hand and put it back and then put it in his other hand. And when his other hand opened, it was gone. You would say, yeah, but it was in the other hand. Right. So now there's like, it's too mundane. It's not magical. And it doesn't convey what you felt when I made that ring disappear.
Yeah. It's almost, honest on the details, but more dishonest on your subjective experience.
Correct.
Of the details.
And so by doing that, because you don't want the other person to necessarily believe you want them to feel what you felt.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we'll round off the edges. We'll erode the truth a little bit. Not enough for me to call you a liar, but enough to where if you were to put this on paper, it would actually matter. It would actually affect and skew the data.
Yep.
And we do that subconsciously.
Yes.
And I see it all the time with magic. It's innocent with magic because it's like whatever. It's just not as important as an experience, but yeah.
Yeah. Often like the Carl Jung synchronicity thing is like it actually doesn't matter what the underlying event is that much. Like it doesn't have to be some perfect synchronicity. The meaning you place on it matters.
Correct.
And so if you like place a specific meaning on this thing that leads you to this other thing, and it's kind of you're being led to this like lower entropy, like some destination that you're supposed to arrive at. It feels like a teleology, this meaningful direction. Then like that's all that matters.
Yeah.
And that actually it doesn't matter if you saw the flying saucer or didn't see the flying saucer, or
Yeah, because what you're trying to communicate isn't fact. What you're trying to communicate is emotion. You're trying desperately to communicate your emotion by using words. And so of course things will be lost in translation because if you could communicate something to them and put a little music on, you know what I mean? That would probably actually help you put them in your position a little bit more and make them feel what you felt, because that's what we're trying to do. A lot of times when we experience things, and when experiencers are saying what they felt, you hear the sort of like the fear, but I know that there are details that they're unaware of, and it's not because they're doing it on purpose, but it's human nature. And so as a magician, I know that that's something I have to also observe, but I know that I also can't be completely contingent on that being the whole experience. Like I can't, discount what I'm hearing either.
Yep.
But you do have to, I think, practice a certain discernment when listening to stories like this. It's the same when people tell me about a trick that a magician showed them, which always happens. You're like, oh, I had this magician once. He did this, this, and this. I know exactly what trick they're referring to when they give me those details, right? And I find it cool as a magician because I'm like, oh, he did a good job, because this person clearly doesn't remember all the other things the magician did, right? So that memory had been successfully engineered and impregnated in this person's psyche.
But you sidestepped the most trippy part of the question, which is that miracles, in your opinion, you've told this to me offline.
This is the second part.
That miracles seem to happen more around magicians.
Yes.
Magicians who, if they're intellectually honest, would not be self-described as Jesus-like characters, would just be practitioners of things that are explainable in the materialist paradigm.
Correct.
But you were saying miracles occur more around these people.
Yeah, and it's interesting enough that Russell Targ actually mentioned this too, that like in his younger days, he was a stage magician and would experience actual miracles during those moments on stage.
Russell Targ ran the CIA's psychic spy program, Stargate. He was one of the founders along with Hal Puthoff.
That's right. But magicians today, ironically, are the most disillusioned and disenchanted people because we're aware of methods, because we're aware of how things function. Most magicians end up being like atheists, or like Penn and Teller famously, who are good friends of the amazing Randy. We're all atheists. Still are. And a lot of magicians are. And they take pride in that, right? Because it's like they have the answers now. So there's no actual magic left. And I was part of that for a long time too, where I thought I knew everything and everything had a psychological explanation for it. But then sometimes, and I started noticing this, miracles would happen. Okay. If you know any magician out there, if you're listening and you have a friend who's a magician, or maybe an online magician that you know, just reach out to them and ask them to tell you about a miracle that happened. I guarantee you they're going to go through about a dozen in their mind before they give you like an answer. And it'll be an impossible thing. You'll think there's no way that happened. So these things happen for, I think, multiple reasons. One, ironically, magicians are the closest to actual magic without realizing it. Like, we are so close to real magic because every day when we perform, we play with odds. So if you think of random number generator, right? These are odds. So on this quantum field, whatever, these possibilities, we play with them. And magicians have something called outs. Okay, these are, so if I go into a magic trick and I mess it up.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know because I have an out. And that out still gives you a magical effect. So you're none the wiser. You think that was the trick all along, that everything that happened, magician in trouble, was part of the act, right? And if I'm a good magician, I can make it look that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so it looks like I'm fumbled, but I recovered. And you're like, oh, he just fumbled on purpose, you know, because that's a thing we do too.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we like to, and I say we, I speak for myself, but I know other magicians do this too. We take chances we shouldn't be taking.
Mm.
And sometimes, for whatever reason, we don't have an out for something and we go for it anyways.
Mm.
And I describe it as a stupid confidence. It's a blind confidence that makes no sense. It's not I hope this goes well.
Mm.
It's just do it. Like something comes over you and you just go with it. And it's high stress environment.
Yeah.
It's there's no out. So you know that, there's no out.
Is there something you can think of now?
Yeah.
What is that?
There's plenty. One really good example, I was in Bermuda with some friends, magician friends of mine. We were at a bar. There was a group of people. We were kind of shuffling cards to each other. People were like, oh my God, you guys magicians or whatever. So started doing some magic to this group of people. So this girl, I take her phone and I'm going to guess her PIN code to her phone, right? Guess. So at this point, I have her phone on the bar. She gave me her phone. I put it on the bar and I already know her passcode at this point. I won't tell you how I know that, but I've figured out a way
it's wild.
to have that piece of personal information without her knowledge. So now as a magician, my presenting mind, what makes a good magician is using that information and theatrically revealing it somehow to create the effect, right? So I have the information. I could just go punch it in and she'd go, wow, and that'd be it, right? Not a really great trick. I mean, it's great, but it's not, could be better. So presentation. So I have this number. I put her phone down the bar. Now at this point in my head, when I do these tricks, especially this one, I always look at the number and then I can cold read a little bit, right? So, let's say it's like all ones, right? I could, for instance, say, oh, you seem like a person who's like got a lot to do in a hurry and you need to get into your phone really fast. You probably text and drive as well, don't you? So I can deem all these things just from 11111. And also, like, if it was 99999, I know that you're probably left-handed. Right. So there's all these like little tells that you can get once you have the information. And like, even if you're wrong, it's like, you're like, no, okay. You kind of play it off, whatever. It's cold reading, doesn't matter, but it can add to the effect again. So, you do this once you have the information, you kind of play around with this and act sort of psychic or whatever. And she placed her phone down at the bar. It's 4 numbers. And I do this for this specific reason. Sometimes I just ad lib. I don't know where I'm going with this. And I'll just be like, let's try this. Because I know that if it does work, it'll be a freaking miracle.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, then I'll just put the code in myself and that'll be my out. And it's fine.
Yeah.
And so I go, you're not going to open your phone. Stupid confidence. I said, you're not going to open your phone. He is. And I point to the bartender. And I said, he's going to open your phone. And she's like, no way, and he's like, all right, cool, I'm in, And so I go, all right, put in 4 random numbers, see if the phone opens. And he puts in 4 and it doesn't open. We call this an offbeat. I go, that would have been a miracle. You know what I mean? And then everybody laughs, like, because they're like, the suspense was like, oh my God, is it? And it doesn't work. I'm like, of course it doesn't work. That'd be ludicrous to think that would work. I'm like, maybe it has to be more of a personal number. So I said, put in your birthday. And he puts in his birthday and the phone opens.
What?
So now I got to play it cool, right? Because I'm the magician and I made this happen. This was the trick all along for them, right? But for me, I'm screaming like a little child on the inside because I'm like, holy shit, this is a real miracle and these people don't even know. Like they know, but they don't know. And so instinctively, because I knew what the numbers were, it was like 0212 or something like that. It was like a birthday.
Yeah.
And so doing this long enough to recognize birthdays, and I could I could tell her star sign at this point. I could like do all these different things because I have that information now.
Yeah.
But I go,
but that's a 1 in 365 chance for him. Or
yes,
even
more,
even way
because
more,
I pointed to someone.
Yeah, and there are four number permutations that don't even involve.
Yeah, it could have been this way too. It could have been a month day or day month.
Oh my god!
Right, and it could have been 6-digit passcode on his phone.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. I said to her, I go, I gave her birthday, and I said, you guys are born on the same day, and they're freaking out. And not only are they born on the same day, they both have a 4-code password, and they both use the same password on their phones.
You were purely going on instinct.
Yep.
That's insane.
Yeah, he also had that password on his phone.
That's wild.
Yeah. So I'm here trying to take.
If you could figure out hers, did you not figure out his and then line them up?
So no, I didn't know what his. I didn't.
You didn't.
I didn't speak to him at all.
It was just like you brought him in at the end.
The idea was if he got it wrong.
Yep.
I would see what he's punching in, and I would know his birthday, and I would know his star sign, so I would use that later on.
Okay, got
something
it.
else.
Interesting. That's funny.
Yeah, I'm doing some recon stuff at the same time.
And then
I'm like
third
layering
attempt,
it.
You would get
and
hers
third
because
attempt,
you knew it.
Yeah, third attempt, I would perhaps, if I wanted to establish some connection and say, hey, I said you were going to open the phone, so here's what I want you to do. Maybe here, hold my hand, and I'm just going to try and channel something that's in your mind. And now I put the passcode in, so it looks like I'm channeling it through him. I could do that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm thinking out loud right now, but like these are like options that I can always play with and variables that I can manipulate to make the effect seem bigger than it actually is. And that's the magician's job of being an entertainer. I want to entertain these people. So doing this where he punches his birthday in and it opens, and that's also the passcode to his phone. And like, now there's this like weird, now there is the birthday paradox. I don't know if you're aware of this, but like in a room of 25 people, 2 people will share the same birthday.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's a mathematical paradox.
Is that a paradox or is that just a likelihood?
It's a paradox. Yeah. It makes no sense that it's a likelihood.
Yeah, 1 in 25 would not.
I think it's 1 in 25. Let me be sure before I.
Why is that a paradox? Why is that more likely than not?
That's why it's a paradox.
But how can you even study? Like, how could one know that? Like, they've just randomly sampled a bunch of rooms or something a bunch of times. Like,
I would guess, yeah. Trying to bring it up right now in ChatGPT to make sure I'm saying what's correct here. Birthday paradox refers to the surprising probability. Oh, here it is. That in a group of just 23 people, there's a 50% chance that at least 2 of them share the same birthday.
What?
This counterintuitive result comes from probability theory and the way that combinations work.
So it is expected through probability theory.
Yes, through probability theory.
But it seems beyond chance.
Yes, it seems beyond chance, correct. So with 57 people, there's a 99% match.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
So there is that to factor in as well.
Sure.
But then you have to factor in that I pointed to this guy. But then I pointed to him.
Yeah.
I didn't ask who shares the same birthday here.
No.
So there's all these extra things, and that a lot of times what'll happen is people don't realize the miracles because the magician, and I can't say, I had no idea this guy would have the same birthday because now I don't look like a magician anymore.
Yeah.
So I have to play it cool.
Yeah.
And magicians have those stories. So many of them, every one of them. Ask a really interesting thing. Ask any magician you know to tell you an actual miracle, and he will tell you a miracle. And the chances are that the conditions are similar. So I've surveyed probably 100 magicians. I have all their answers. I've written them all down. It's really interesting. And I also asked them like, what are the conditions? So what time, what point of the performance did this happen? Were you did you have an out? And did you build rapport with these people? And a lot of times the condition is later when you're feeling in the zone, kind of like tuned in almost, where nothing can go wrong.
Yeah.
You feel like you're walking on water.
You're flowing.
Yeah, exactly. You're in a flow state. 2 is there is no out. So there can be an out, but the out's not going to be great.
Yeah.
You know that. Like, it's not a decent out.
It's almost like with Psy or remote viewing, like the survival instinct.
Yes.
It's like you don't really have a backup. There's no plan B.
You have to stupid confidence. Like something has to come over you.
Yep.
and you just go with it, knowing that you feel this confidence and this like flow, and nothing can go wrong and everything's going to go right.
Yeah.
If you have a doubt, it's probably you're going to have to jump back to some weird out. But if there's no doubt, you just do it, and it works. Like that's where it works.
Yeah.
And so like the third part is that this rapport. So a lot of times, I mean, I've done this trick probably. I'll show you a trick after.
Okay.
I don't want to spoil it.
Okay.
But I'll show you a trick. And
can we do it on air?
Yeah, we could do it on air.
We don't have to do it now. We could do it at the end.
Sure.
If you want. Why don't we do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Given all of this amazing experience that you have, what do you think is, you don't have to call anybody out, but they're obviously UFOs are sort of, full of psyops everywhere. Do you think there is one or two in particular as far as the emphasis, like your example of the ring, where it's like, I'm not really thinking about the transfer of the ring from one hand to the other. I had been focused on it when you told me to focus on it. Is there something like that with UFOs where it's like, focus on the tip of the iceberg when the tip of the iceberg looks nothing like the rest of the iceberg, where there's some redirect or shift in attention?
Yeah, by whom are you?
I don't know. I'm asking you, like, do you have an intuitive sense that there's a deliberate attempt to shift attention in any directions? Again, not going after anybody in particular, but like just narrative wise. And if not, no worries,
No, I 100% think it's a possibility. The problem with this type of illusion or psyop or whatever you want to call it is that there's no way of proving or disproving unless you have somebody actually say it. And even then, you don't know if that's just part of the illusion.
Yep.
So just much like a magic trick, I don't know the outcome.
Yep.
So I can't tell you if it's deliberate.
Yeah, but you're more likely than the average person to see a magic trick and be like, oh, I see what he did. He like emphasized this thing and he didn't this other
because
thing.
of pattern recognition and understanding the trick.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that I can't be fooled.
Yeah.
As a magician, I'm still capable of being fooled because I still abide by the same sense as everyone else does. And those senses can be manipulated. And if you're performing to a magician, you do certain things that the magician would expect you to do. So you counter that, So if I do a trick and I'm wearing a thumb tip, like a fake thumb, and I'm doing some sleight of hand, a less knowledgeable magician, or maybe even a more knowledgeable layman, might think that the thumb tip has something to do with the method, but I can use it as a red herring to throw you off the scent.
Have you spotted anything like this in UFO world?
So,
yeah.
Yes, but I can't be sure because I don't know what the outcome is.
Yep. Anything, again, maybe speaking in at whatever level of granularity you feel comfortable with, can you talk about like how you spotted, anything in particular?
I mean, a lot of it is, I would say the things that come to mind to me are when people talk about their experiences. I think for me, it raises a lot of red flags in the words they choose to use, and also the frequency at which this story has been told and how it's been molded over time.
Yeah.
And people get that. People in ufology pick that up too. They're very smart. They watch all these videos and they go, oh, he didn't say that before.
Yeah.
And that's correct. And so like those things I think have to be noted. But also noted should be, if you never change your story at all, are you cognizant now that people are aware of you changing your story might make you look like you're not telling the truth.
Yep.
So you're purposely not changing the story. Like these are, and again, it's impossible to prove.
Totally. You could see somebody getting a little detail wrong and being like, I don't know if I got that right on the spot. And then it's this game of telephone where you have to force fit like the next, telling of that story to like the version that you told the first time around or whatever.
Yeah. And you're probably more likely, like, let's take the Rua Zimbabwe experience, for example. Those children all kind of drew similar things, but they were all different. And the stories all varied slightly. I think for me, that is more believable.
Yeah, of course.
Than everyone telling the exact same story. Sounds like a script.
Or you were brainwashed or something.
Yeah.
Something was orchestrated. Yeah, no, because that's like any memory.
Yeah, but you would say, these kids' stories doesn't line up, so it's not true intuitively.
Yeah, sure.
right?
But I think if you know how memory actually works,
Correct. You would
no,
say, oh, there's a there. There's something that happened.
totally.
That they're all talking about a similar thing with
Yep.
their perspectives and their memories.
I also think if to some extent, seek and ye shall find, like what you're open to in terms of, your aperture, like your what you see in the possibility space of what you can experience in life. If that in any way dictates what you actually do experience in life, a la magicians experiencing possibly more miracles,
Yeah.
then there's a weird way in which some people who are higher on the openness scale and they experience these things, I think it's actually somewhat blasé. It's like this normal experience because like they live in this paradigm where like other beings exist or whatever, and then you are sort of in certain cases like it's like go on this podcast or do a documentary or whatever, and it's like say your thing, and then they have to like be like okay, like this is what happened, and then the eyes were all buggy and the blah blah blah, and they have to like get into this character when in fact it was this like kind of hermetically sealed thing that's just like affected them a lot, like but it was like deeply personal. And I could see there being cognitive dissonance around that, where it's like, well, I have to like tell it in this way that's de facto an argument for the thing having happened, when in fact, like they experienced it and it felt very banal and a part of their life. Maybe banal is not the right word because it was like sort of mystical and sacred, but like, of course it would happen because they're open to it.
Yeah.
Like that's their orientation.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, it's an absolute possibility. Like, I mean, that's something, again, you can't disprove and you can't discount.
Yeah.
And, knowing methodry doesn't mean that method was inherently used. And that's what I keep coming back to, is that, like, everything is possible as a magician. Everything is possible.
Yep.
But because I can give you an explanation for it, that doesn't mean that that's what happened.
Yep.
And I think that's the difference between like someone like James Randi and I.
Yeah.
Whereas like or Mick West.
Just because you can't come up with an explanation does not mean it's always the explanation.
And you can come up with an explanation. That's the other thing, is like, as a magician, that's my job. I have to come up with a way that this works no matter what. Like when you watch, certain magicians on television, most people aren't aware that there is a team of consultants that are like this brain trust of magicians that are gathered from the four corners of the world to come up with the most impossible magic tricks, and work with the magician on camera to teach them or help them or guide them into creating the best possible illusion for the audience at home. And this goes back in time to every magician. Like, we consult each other. We talk. I go to magic conventions every year where there's thousands of magicians, and we talk about secrets and we help each other with justifications and subtleties and all this stuff. So, I just think that, like, people just aren't aware of how much work goes into a lot of illusions.
Yeah.
Like, it's a stupid amount of work and a stupid amount of information that we have to like retain in order to create these illusions. But it's not impossible.
Yeah.
You can do anything.
Yeah.
You can look at Copperfield. You walk through the Wall of China. You can make the Statue of Liberty disappear. You know what I mean? You can do that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that he actually made the Statue of Liberty disappear.
Yeah.
It means that that's what it looked like. He made it look exactly the same way. I can make it look like I'm psychic.
Yep.
I can convince someone that I'm psychic. That doesn't make me psychic.
You're right. And it doesn't make Joseph McMoneagle a magician.
Correct.
Yes. And so it's so fascinating. It's so fascinating learning from you and talking to you about like some of these tricks where I'm like, if I were to see them, I'd be like, how could you ever orchestrate them? And obviously I would know on some level that they were fake, but I'd be like, this is,
let's try something here.
Okay, let's do it.
You have a 6-digit passcode or a 4-digit passcode?
6.
All right. Put a random 6 numbers in.
Any random 6 numbers in. Okay, and I should remember which ones.
No, just random.
Like,
random. Didn't work.
Yeah.
Yes. Again, that would have been a miracle.
That would have been insane.
Right?
Yeah.
That would have been end of the episode. I would have been like, you're welcome.
Right?
As if it's just screaming on the inside.
I would have cut everything else, and that would have just, YouTube short.
Let's put in your passcode. I'll put it this way so nobody sees it. See if that works.
Okay.
Didn't work.
Yep.
Okay. Think of someone close to you.
Okay.
Month, day, and year. Their birthday.
Okay.
Who are you thinking of? Can you say it?
My dad.
Put his birthday in.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Dude. What? Are you serious? How the fuck did you do that?
I didn't do it. You did it.
That's insane. But how would you change it live? Dude? It doesn't make any sense. It was you can't change your fucking thing live. Like,
so what are you thinking about right now? Methods?
yeah.
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 What's the method you're going with?
I mean, you've got to be able to change it live.
Okay. And even so. Oh, you mean change it after I found out that you were thinking of your dad?
Yeah.
But I already had my phone out before I asked you to think of someone.
I know. So,
Yeah.
like, how would you do that? I don't know, that maybe that's impossible. But then, how would you? Then you'd have to like suggest. You'd have to like use suggestion to like get me to pick my dad, and then
Right.
you'd somehow have to know his birthday, which is that doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is really hard. Can you just tell me now? Is this one of the times where you didn't have an out and you just went for it, and like we could have cut this if like you had failed? Okay, so you knew what you were doing.
Yeah. But you see how that can look that way?
Totally. Yeah, no, I can't figure it. I need to. I'm gonna think about this a lot.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Someone with lower moral standards might tell you that was actually psychic.
Yeah.
That's the ethical line that magicians have to walk.
Totally.
And that some magicians, and I won't say names, choose to ignore.
That's whack.
Yeah, it is super
cool.
whack.
Yeah, yeah.
But I love it in the context of entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And I will always let you know, like a magician is the most honest profession because they promise they're going to lie and then they do.
Yeah. Can you say how you did it or no?
No, of course not. I did it very well.
I'm going to be thinking about this a lot.
Yeah.
I'm really curious about this. Is so fascinating. Yeah. Think of your
passcode.
Okay.
I already know a lot of information about you. So, they could think at home that I might have seen you put your passcode in or something. And that might be true.
Mm-hmm.
But, you're definitely someone who is on the go a lot. You're definitely someone who maybe is on their phone when they shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
All the time.
You got to get into your phone pretty quick. You're a pretty jet set guy. Mm-hmm. So we're not talking about a very complicated phone password. Mm-hmm. You're also right-handed. Mm-hmm. I can tell here. So my guess is that it's happening.
Dude, what the fuck? I'm changing it right after this. We release this shit.
I hope it's not your PIN code to your bank as well.
That's nuts, dude. You just cold read me. You'd like ping off my like registering of what you're saying? Or?
No.
What?
I just made it look that way.
Dude.
That's magic.
That's really crazy.
Once you already have the information, you can do all the performative stuff you want. But it doesn't make it less interesting. I think.
You'd be a good spy, man.
Yeah. John Mulholland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
CIA trainer.
Trained the CIA in deceptive practices and subterfuge in the 50s. Wrote a manual on it.
John Dee was the magician in Queen Elizabeth's court. Yep. And he was, a magician, but also he'd blur the lines and say he was communicating with angels through like Enochian, magic. Who knows? It's
where do you toe the line? I mean, there's religious figures in history that have done magic tricks too.
Totally. Well, there's this philosopher, Rene Girard, who's this, French anthropologist at Stanford, and he's sort of this kind of somewhat heretical figure, but he had a cult-like following. And he would talk about kind of pagan scapegoating cycles of these kind of magical figures. These figures they would sort of use magic. And so because of their like use of like the seemingly paranormal, society would have ailments and they would blame it on these scapegoats because they seemed sort of like larger than life or whatever. And they'd sort of come down on them and then they would blame them for everything, kill them in these sort of scapegoating rituals. and then anoint them as gods.
Mm.
But often, Girard would talk about them sort of developing real magical powers once the kind of collective closes in on them,
Right.
and says, "Oh, this is real." They start to like use real magic to like defend themselves, and it becomes this like crazy mythology, like right before they die.
Right.
And so like maybe in the beginning it is trickery.
Yeah.
And that's what it's this like really super weird blurred lines sort of analysis of the thing.
Correct. Yeah.
And Girard himself is like this character who's like, there's clearly something esoteric and interesting going on,
Mm-hmm.
but he's also, this like anthropologist that seemingly explains
Mm-hmm.
on the like outer layer, he explains the religious through this sort of just, anthropological, purely human, lens.
And that might have even happened here on like a micro scale where, although the information that I had, I obtained in some way, or I knew what you were going to say because of something that I had preempted or whatever that is, or whatever that might be. Your password is also closely related to your father's birthday.
Yeah, no, I thought of that too. I thought of that, but that wasn't why I did it.
No, I know.
Okay.
But that's, again, maybe that's the real magic.
Right. Yeah, that there's some sort of like tie.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so fascinating. Well, I think of like, the word Occam's razor.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, this is, it's like, term, where it's like the shortest path or the simplest explanation is correct. And like, this is something Mick West or like any of these James Randi, any of these debunkers would use.
Mm-hmm.
But if you actually look at the etymology of the word, it came from this guy, William of Occam, who is this Christian monk from the 13th century. And for him, it was the least number of entities responsible for a thing is probably the answer.
Oh, right. So like a lowest common denomination in terms of like
the least coordination or whatever. And often that meant like a miracle happens. It's God, because it's like the least number of entities. The one.
Yeah.
Wow. And now I think because we're swimming in this sort of skeptical epistemological soup of like the age of disenchantment, you see something, you say Occam's razor, and the connotation itself,
skepticism
of Occam's razor is
prosaic.
That has to be some Rube Goldberg machine where there is some causal chain. We just don't see it yet.
Yeah, and that's that line that I want to remain open to as a magician who is aware of 1,000 methods. I don't want to let that get in the way of learning if there isn't another method, because if you look at, even if I look at my own personal experience, I can definitely see that being the case. Sure, there's an explanation for all these unexplainable things that have happened to me, these synchronicities and these birthday paradoxes and whatnot. There are explanations for them, but that doesn't mean that is the reason.
Well, this is a great segue into this question, which is, what is something, you've been doing this for over a year now, and I'm sure you've gone into a lot of things thinking this is insane, if true, like, you just did this amazing piece on the Lacerta files, these, documents from Sweden about these like reptilians or whatever. And like, that's among the more out there things that you've covered, but you've covered everything from that to like, definitely real historical corroborated stuff with Danny Sheehan. You've had Lou Elizondo on. What's the thing that you went into where you're like, I know this is, or I'm pretty sure this is fake, but it's going to be interesting. Yeah. And then you got kind of opt a little by it, and you're like, oh my God, I think this is real. And I think there's like actually a lot true to it.
Two things specifically: the 4chan whistleblower, and the EBO biologist. Those two corroborate each other, first of all, which obviously you could just chalk up to one of them read one of the files and based it on the other.
Right.
The thing is that both of these were created after AI had already been, I say AI, after these GPT models have already been slightly developed. So there is, a chance that they were used in the process. Now, after feeding those into AI, it doesn't really tell you that it's made by AI, but, who knows? And having experts read, especially the microbiology stuff that I'm just not educated enough to understand a lot of that stuff. They seem to think that this person is definitely like doctorate level microbiology. but also, potentially a great LARPer, a great storyteller, a great, creative fictional writer at the same time.
Should we set both up real quick for the audience? Yeah.
So the 4chan whistleblower, right after, I think this was early 2023. Could have been early 2023 or early 20. No, it was definitely early 2023. It was after. Was it after or before David Grush? I think it might have been before. Mm-hmm. And then the microbiologist might have been after. I think I might be getting that mixed up. But anyways.
I think the microbiologist was after.
It was after.
It was before.
Correct. Yeah. So the 4chan whistleblower purported that he'd been working on these crash retrievals for for a decade or whatever it was in the early 2000s, late 90s. And that his job was they were monitoring these underground or underwater, what they called mobile construction units, these massive, submerged UAPs that didn't have lights, that were shaped like giant burgers, apparently, and that they were on the ocean floor and essentially building to specifications, to exact specifications, these UAP and sending them out of the water to destinations unknown. A lot of that is usually where strife happens, or maybe like a secret nuclear dance between a couple countries, or maybe even resource collection, whatever that is. And and they would always come back. These UAP would always come back into this MCU. And his job was, he said there was 4 units deployed for these crash retrievals. And he said, first of all, the crashes, he's like, they happened more often than people think. He's like, these beings are not perfect. They are learning. And so now he's like, we see a lot less bodies in these crafts. He thinks partially the reason for that is because we recovered the bodies and they didn't like that. So they started developing like these AI sort of ships that would fly around instead. Anyways, yeah, so these crashes would happen. His team, he was on the second team. He said the first team would go in, clear out the bodies and the element 115. Right.
Bob Lazar.
Yeah, they'd have one guy do that. And once the bodies were out, he would go in and strip out the internal components of the ship. So like the tools and like the things that were on the walls. And again, everything was built to spec. So if there was like some type of instrument, it would be perfectly placed in a wall with a space made for it. Everything was to spec.
Wild.
For that,
Yeah.
So they would strip that out, and then team 3 and 4 would, he said, like all likelihood, just remove the bulk of the craft, take it apart or whatever that is. So that was kind of his job. And then he would like speculate on what the higher ups would tell him, what he heard, and how the new management came in, and they've kind of shut everybody up, and you can't talk about certain things. And this took me 4 hours to read through. So like I did on 4 different videos, because it was this 4chan exchange, which we all know is a cesspool. Trying to like read through 4chan is literal schizophrenia. It's not good for your health. You know what I mean? You're going to find a lot of garbage there. And so it doesn't help. But if you were to want to become a whistleblower, without going through direct channels, because obviously, a lot of people might argue that these aren't actual whistleblowers if they're not saying everything. They're just kind of being told what they're allowed to say. Well, this guy's like, I'm going to say everything. And he's like, I'm just going to do it on here, and this is going to go nuts. And it's unfiltered. And the things that he was saying were so interesting and kind of lined up with UFO lore. And at other points, really created new things within this landscape. And towards the end, he said something that really resonated and kind of haunts me to this day. He said, notice yourself coming back. He's like, I'm not here to convince you of anything, but notice yourself coming back to this as more information unfolds. And it's exactly what I've been doing. I've been going back to it over and over and over and over. When Lou mentioned the giant underwater thing moving at 500 knots underwater, that's something this guy talked about.
Yep.
He said these things would move underwater like crazy. He said when approached, they would be evasive, and they would just leave. If cornered, it didn't end well. Like you get vaporized. He's like, it would shit on anything electronic in the vicinity. He's like, we've sent nukes after it, like on submarines. we've sent jets, we've scrambled like boats, like none of them come back. If the intent is, anything malicious, like you'll just get decimated. And he said, the questions were really interesting because like the audience, like the people asking questions, was like a Q&A, and they would ask like, do they ever come from space? And he's like, no, rarely. He's like, we'd rarely see anything come in from orbit. These things mostly left the water and like zoomed out to wherever it was going and would come right back. And that's why he also assumed that there was probably multiple of these things, because if we're seeing them on the East Coast, this one was situated in the Bahamas, that sort of Bermuda Triangle area, which also
hotspot,
right?
Yeah, and there are weapons training facilities where there's like underwater cables that people don't know where they're going. It's called, AUTEC is this spot out
would
there.
make sense.
Yeah,
and it would make sense that it's mobile too.
Oh, totally.
And so these ships would often come back. And so they're thinking, like this guy thought, and he was kind of putting together while he's like, oh yeah, he's like, it kind of does make sense that he was never told about more of them. But he's like, it would make sense that there are more, because if people are seeing them on the East Coast, they probably have something on the East Coast or up in the Atlantic or in the Indian Ocean.
What about Trump's speech where he says, talking about the Jersey drones, he said, these are coming out of the water. We know where the garage is. Or he didn't say they're coming out of the water. He says, it's very strange. We know where the garage is. We go into the garage if we wanted. And then you have the sheriff reporting that they were coming out of the water.
And what a perfect place to hide on the ocean, on the ocean floor.
Also, the Office of Naval Intelligence is what wrote up these reports. Tim Gaudet talks a lot about, some interesting USOs, unidentified submersible objects. There's an interesting book by a guy named John Pena Craven where he talks about underwater tech retrievals of secret technology made by submarines. And there are all these lost submarines like the USS Connecticut, where it's like, we don't really know what happened. Feels like most of the details are still classified.
Right.
So yeah, look,
And then he talks about the shape of the crafts that are being expulsed from this mothership, this mobile construction unit, and how they didn't have any features. A lot of them were like the spherical ones. He's like, are like drones. They're not manned at all. And those are like more for scanning. And he would go like, if you see an orange light, they're scanning for minerals or biologics. And if the orange light comes up to you, there's a likelihood that you're going to be abducted or you've been abducted. And he had all these like different codes and these different, like, you get really into detail about like what they think and what he thinks they're here for. And
go for it.
Yeah. I was just going to say that for me was the most interesting. It's like, okay, well, what's the why? And he said the higher ups seem to think one of two things. He's like, first of all, they're pretty much all in agreement that they just don't care about us. Like they just don't care. They don't care. It's more like a zoo where they're not going to be bothered by the day-to-day of the animals in the zoo, but if one of them breaks loose or like, starts using something to like harm the zookeepers or anything else, like they just have to keep it in check. But they don't care what happens in the enclosure. Like, you guys do whatever you want. We don't care. So it's more like that is their attitude towards it. And they said that could be one of two reasons. Either one, they're kind of waiting for us to, hit this higher, ascension, whatever, and we become enlightened. Or two, they're kind of here until something else gets here and keeping this place around until whoever owns the planet comes to pick it up, which I thought was like a darker, weirder theory.
Dude, there's just like kind of maintenance.
Yeah, kind of like these pods that are placed on all the planet as like, it seems like an AI security system. Yeah. In that even the biologics, and you look at tons of accounts of these grays, because that's what he said, they were these grays, seem to be these biological drones. Yeah. And so part of the AI system being,
I think that's why David Grush uses the term biologics. It's aptly vague.
Yeah, they're like almost soulless.
They are. And it seems like they just kind of execute these sort of low-level tasks or whatever. And often they're around preservation. So it's like genetic sampling or gamete collection or whatever. And it makes sense you'd send your like AI homeostasis global, maintenance kit,
Yes.
right, out. You wouldn't like send your thing and
drop it
then
in
it
the ocean.
answers all the like honestly dumb first order questions of like, why do they crash and what? But they would just they get seen, but they don't care.
They
It's
don't
like they
care.
don't give a shit.
They don't
Yeah,
care.
they don't. If you go to like the zoo and you're looking at silverback gorillas in Rwanda or whatever, do you care if you get seen? Like, you probably on some level, like you're wearing camo, so like it would be ephemeral from their perspective.
look
but
at
they'd also
pandas.
would like occasionally see you.
We dress up like pandas.
Yeah, we just right.
To go into the panda enclosure.
Right.
Panda's like a weird looking panda.
Yeah.
Not quite a panda.
Yeah.
It kind of looks like us, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
feeding us, and it's studying us. Weird,
So it's like the gray thing where it's like, yeah, we like did our best, but like whatever, like they just gotta like execute the task.
Correct.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, that seems to be what it is. Like this, like you said, like this maintenance sort of, sort
and
of.
they're so much more powerful that it doesn't really matter. Like if one of them goes down, it's like you lost your dispensable thing. Like whatever,
They don't like it. I think they're like, ugh, that sucks. But I don't think it's really the end of the world to them. They're just kind of like doing their job again.
Yeah.
And like if you were some like intergalactic billionaire, let's say, that like megalomaniac that wanted to like seed life across the universe, let's say Elon Musk in the year 2 million.
Yeah.
Right? Like you would have resources across the universe doing things like this. You wouldn't yourself go see what's going on. And there's something really disturbing about that to me. And it's kind of like what disturbed me with like Fire in the Sky, the first movie I've ever seen about aliens when I was like 9 years old. Not a movie you should watch when you're 9, by the way. Do not show your kids Fire in the Sky. But, the most disturbing thing to me was that they wouldn't allow us to know what was going on. They wouldn't share their culture with us. We weren't allowed to know.
So this is Travis Walton.
Yeah.
He's in Arizona.
Yeah, he gets abducted.
National park, right?
Yeah, but in the movie they played it out so differently.
Yeah.
But these beings that were sort of performing this procedure on him ignored his screams, didn't care about any of his well-being, and just did the tasks and sort of perhaps communicated among themselves, and like, but they wouldn't allow us to see or hear or understand what they're doing.
Yeah.
And that really frightened me, where I was like, how dare you like not tell us what you're up to?
Yeah.
If you're going to do this to us. Like there's something really that didn't sit well with me.
Is that part of your mission now, to figure out what they're up to? Because I feel like a lot of the vector along which you are making progress is like, what do they want? What's the sort of culture on the other side of the kind of non-human intelligence? How do they think of us?
Yeah, that's and it might be a multifaceted answer that I'm not ready for, but I do believe that like I'm super curious about that stuff. And when I think of these like these aliens right now that we're encountering, and if this is the case, that they're all just like these grays, or just a part of this maintenance system that was like placed throughout the universe, to think that like some of us might accidentally, through some happenstance or encounter, chance or whatever, be quote unquote lucky or unlucky enough to meet the worker bee. That's it. That's as far as that goes. Not meeting the next one or the next one or some of us may by chance through accident get to meet the lowest form of their, like, they don't like kind of this robotic whatever.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh my, it's God.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it's just like the worker bee.
Can I flip the frame a bit on your frustration? Because like, you think of all the people who are traumatized just by meeting the worker bee, that maybe it's pretty adaptive. Like think about all of, you need to get often these people get sort of hypnotic regressions, and then they go through, sometimes therapy and
so
like
much trauma.
It's analogous to experiencing any other traumatic experience. If you were mugged and beat up ruthlessly on the street, it would be similar sort of shards, compartmentalization, sort of, repressed
it is
aspects
similar.
of it. It's very similar. And so from a cognitive psychology perspective. And so if you are the ultimate being, maybe you're way, like think about the movie Arrival, right? Like the like cephalopods or whatever. Like if you actually experience that in real life, I think a high percentage of people would go insane. I do.
But also it kind of like, I do think it supports the idea that they just don't care, because if they did, they wouldn't make these things look so freaking ugly, dude.
Right.
They'd make them a little more appealing.
Right.
or familiar at least.
Right.
Or maybe that's their attempt to making them familiar. So imagine how ugly
Well, that's
they
what I'm
are.
saying. I'm not convinced.
They're like,
that-
oh, we made similar humans. You're like, ugh, what is this little gray dude? They're like, it's a human. You're like, that's not a human.
Yeah. And for all we know, like they're just good enough to like complete the objective of like
Right.
doing whatever they need, and like
Bipedal.
they haven't like made the upgrade or
Yeah.
whatever,
Or they
you
don't
know,
care.
or they don't care.
Yeah.
So and then so if that is the case, then maybe they are sort of protecting us from like the fact that 99% of us, if you look at Diana Pasulka's description of St. Francis of Assisi encountering the seraphim or whatever, like any of these things, I think it would drive most people
Horrific.
a little nuts. Horrific.
Yeah.
And, he has what she would now say is probably like, electromagnetic, radiation or whatever. And like but then the story that like never ends up getting told around this is like he dies from it a year later. And so in some ways, maybe you need to just see the worker bee. Like maybe the worker bee is like, that drives you crazy enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know very many people who'd want to see a gray in their bedroom. Like that's not something I want to see ever.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I also wonder, like all we're seeing is their scientists, really, or not even. We're just seeing like the arms of their scientists. Like we're not meeting their poets,
the lab interns.
Yeah, exactly. We're not meeting their musicians.
Yeah,
if they know what music is, we get to see their scientists. Well, what a shitty first encounter. I don't want to send my Earth scientists to be the first people to meet a new civilization. Could you imagine? Could you imagine getting like scientists, putting them on like a UFO, sending them to another planet, and being like, "You guys are the ones that are going to establish first contact," and they're like socially awkward, a little weird. They're like nervous and like they don't really know how to interact and how to like use the right words in a social situation. Like I wouldn't like that. I would probably send over someone with more charisma, with maybe a philosopher, maybe someone, you know what I mean? So why send us the scientists?
Well, maybe
because they don't care.
Either they don't care, or a la the Prime Directive in Star Trek, they are waiting for us to reach some sort of consciousness litmus test. Yeah. And once we've reached that threshold, we are worthy of real interaction.
Yeah, that would make sense too. And I hope that that's the case. I hope that this is just some type of like safeguard that's here to make sure we don't destroy ourselves, because I think we do need that. And I've always been in the.
I do too.
Yeah,
I think if you actually viewed us having a multipolar nuclear world through like a pure game theory probability lens, like I think the world may have already ended. Like I don't
multiple times.
Like and then I think if not, it's probably gonna end soon. If you just think we live in a world without this other stuff,
we wouldn't make it.
No, we wouldn't. There's no way. I mean, there's no way. Do you see like? I don't see us like de-arming or de-escalating on the nuclear front. So like. And then it's like, if arguably we're in a worse situation than the Cold War now, because it's more confusing vis-a-vis Russia and China
and the UAP stuff,
the
advanced technology, and
and well, also just the weaponry that like everybody's like it's all like AI and warfare or whatever, and like. Like that's like a cold hard algorithm that then has to make the decision, and then there has to be some sort of human in the loop. But like the human is becoming parasitized and like demoted in that loop as far as the decision making goes. And they have to be from a game theory lens. If like the adversary is using the AI thing, then you have to use the AI thing. And so it doesn't feel like things are getting like more likely that we ascend through the great filter and make it on the other side. If the great filter though is more consciousness based, that I think gives us a little more hope from like a materialist lens.
Yeah, I don't think we should be exploring other planets right now.
Totally.
Yeah, we should be focusing on
this. The fact that we have a Goldilocks planet.
Yeah,
that's extremely. You have the anthropic principle in physics. Like we're so lucky. Like if Planck's constant were like slightly deviated, like we wouldn't have a habitable Earth. If hydrogen and oxygen didn't form these perfect crystal lattice structures, the more solid form of water, which is ice, would be more dense and it'd sink below, and the Earth would flood over. Like there are a million examples like that.
And what a cry for help to want to live on such a shitty planet like Mars.
Yeah.
Where it's just gross.
Yeah.
There's nothing good there.
Yeah.
I don't see the allure
If we can't
when
make
we have fjords and we have like, you know, vast valleys of like beautiful life, and we'd rather see ourselves living in some weird, you know, artificial hut, that's a cry for help.
yeah, on a red,
Like,
on a red, barren, deoxygenated planet,
radiated,
and we have like
storms, and
Interlaken and
freezing.
Switzerland and like Shangri-La. You have like, you know, like
Yeah.
Tibet here,
Makes
and like
no sense. It's
and
a cry for help.
But we have to go to Mars because we're gonna save humanity. If we just go to Mars, we're good.
Yeah.
It's you know, totally. It feels like a, you know, like a cynical, almost like a distraction, where it's like,
yeah.
if you focus all your efforts towards something that's maybe Sisyphean, but directs all of your attention and energy towards something it's nominally charismatic,
Yeah. Okay.
then you forget about, you know, how bad things are here or something.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but if you actually think about it, it's completely illogical.
And yeah, that's it. And that's why I struggle a lot when I hear about these cases where these abductees get, like, there's a pattern with abductees. You get taken out of your room or out of your bed or whatever it is. You get brought in. They perform some type of examination or some type of operation, whatever it is. Then they give you a tour of the ship. Then they send you imagery of the world completely being annihilated, these terrible, terrible images, and make you feel bad for what we're doing to the world, and then they put you back home.
Yeah.
That is the protocol, it seems like, for what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
That's like, okay, we're going to do this, then we leave them with this, and then that's like the protocol that that's the directive that they're following.
Yeah.
To, like, because maybe they're not in control. They're just like, they're doing the thing. They're like, okay, now we got to give them the images, and now we got to and give them the tour. Okay, tour number, and put them back to their bed. Everything should be good. And they found that, like, there's been no resistance there, and like, okay, this is working, and they haven't really tweaked it. And so when that happens, I'm always so skeptical, because it's like, you know, you go to Zimbabwe and you hit these kids, these children, with these images of like, technology is bad and we're blowing up the earth and like we're killing, we're like, it's just the worst imagery ever, and this is all your fault, humans. And like we're crying and we're so introspective and like we got to change, and like nothing happens. Nothing freaking changes. Ever. Like, if you're such an intelligent being, then you probably have the foresight to understand that we're not going to do shit. Like, we're not going to do anything to change this world on our own that we wouldn't have already done.
Yeah.
If anything, it's not getting that much better. We're killing more trees and we're polluting the oceans more than ever. And it's like, that isn't helping.
Yeah.
You have to know that.
Yeah.
Being a smart, superior, entity, you have to know that telling us that we're being bad doesn't help us with a solution. There needs to be intervention.
There's a great book called The Inner Game of Tennis, and it's all about, like, if you like criticize a person over and over again for like making mistakes,
right,
it doesn't help them get better at tennis at all.
Yeah.
You like just let them go. And like, it's almost like this, like, how to coach without coaching at all.
Sure.
And I'm skeptical as well. I think it's so easy. I mean, a lot of these things sort of echo this, like, Greta Van Thunberg, like, sort of like these solutions that are overly technocratic, where it is a hypnotic trick.
And look at the track record from those people. The all you're doing is, and you're just going to end up creating people who are going to write a book and speak at UFO conventions.
Totally.
You're not creating like the next president or creating like a world leader that's going to change anything. It's never that.
It's never that.
It's always utter trauma.
all utopian movements end in complete failure. And like, there's a good book called Passport to Utopia, not to be confused with Passport to Magonia. And it's all of these like utopian movements. And you think about like the 20th century is the age of ideology. Like, this was like Hitler and Stalin and Trotskyism, all of these things where it's like, it's too simple. Marxism, it's all too simple. It's like, if you just do these sort of technocratic things, then we're good. We'll figure it out. It's all good. And empirically, all of those always fail. And in fact, if you look at their underlying roots, they're sort of they're cult-like and hyper-Christian in a way. Like, they're actually like the more sort of religious than you realize.
And so then you have to ask yourself why.
Yep.
So why are we being shown these things?
I think you have to be skeptical.
So then,
probably to manage us or something.
Yeah, or to justify what they're doing to us.
Yep.
If you're being operated on or being, things being shoved up your nostril and whatnot, like all these horrific things, it's trauma. And then you're like internally frustrated, afraid, fearful, resentful, spiteful to these beings. And then they implant these emotions in your mind and say, no, you're the bad guy.
Yeah.
Look what you're doing. And you start crying because you're like, oh, what are we doing? And they go, we're helping you.
It's like this negging process.
Yeah.
It's probably like Charles Manson did to the family.
Yeah, we're helping. We're here to help you. And we're like, and now we're thankful to them for doing these procedures. And I'm not saying that is the thing. I'm saying that this is what it looks like to me after just reading a lot of these cases where, I use this example a lot, but yeah, if like, my coffee cup started talking to me, grew a mouth right now and two eyes and was like, hey, the earth is flat. Actually, I would be inclined to believe it.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds absurd. At first, I checked myself into a hospital, but then once, I confirmed that this is reality, it's basically telling me that on some level, at least partially, that my reality is a lie.
Yeah.
And it has shown me that.
Yeah.
So it has given me more truth.
Yeah.
And so I would be inclined to believe it. And so if I was some type of light coming down from the sky and I spoke to you in your mind and told you that I was God.
Yeah.
There is no reason you would believe it. Not believe it.
Not believe it.
Yeah. In fact, if you spoke against that light, they would kill you.
Yep.
That's the reality of the situation, that anyone who gets a message from these NHI has no reason to doubt the message.
Yeah.
Because it's showing you something true.
Yeah.
And so therefore you automatically just believe it. That's
the rest of it has to be
true. Of course. Yeah. And there's no reason. And I'm saying that if I had an interaction where they spoke into my head and told me some information, I would be convinced that it's the truth too. I'm not saying I'm immune to that.
Well, you have a great example of Christopher Columbus.
Yeah.
You want to tell that story?
Yeah. He was, this was, I think, in the Bahamas, but he showed up with his boat and there was like the Bahamas? It was an island.
West Indies. One of those. Yeah.
And there was the native people that were there, and his whole crew had been starving and they were thirsty and they wanted to, they were dying of like all these terrible things. And so they had asked the locals to provide them with food and water, and the locals refused. And so they were trying to come up with a plan on how to get them to like feed, the crew. And so, Chris Columbus had said, if you do not do what we ask, we will block out your sun in 3 days' time. You have 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
And so 3 days later, sure enough, there was a solar eclipse. And so him knowing that there was a solar eclipse happening, use that against the people as like kind of like a psyop or whatever to, feed his crew. And they did that. And so again,
wild.
Yeah, I mean, Arthur C. Clarke, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Yep.
And so when you can present that, we have no reason not to believe that.
Yep.
So anybody who is above our level of intelligence sufficiently enough can claim to be God.
Yeah.
And probably does.
Yeah. It's so fascinating. So given that, and given, I think, that very healthy orientation towards this entire subject, from your year and a half of doing the show, and I'm sure much, longer than that, of being sort of interested in this topic, how do you orient towards it? Like, what's the problem? Because there's something around a lot of these, experiencers where sometimes it feels like they're outsourcing their agency, or it's like, often it's just like everything they told me is true.
Mm-hmm.
Other times they feel sort of antagonized and like they just want to be totally rid of it, and like they don't take any of it, like worthy of, consideration. They literally just want to like run away, like compartmentalize or whatever. Is there some like healthy middle ground, or like how should one orient, themselves towards the subject?
It's difficult to say because I'm not like I'm not someone who has been abducted, right? So I can't tell those people how to feel. Obviously, they're going through it. So, and I've not, been a part of military projects where I know of legacy stuff, So the perspective that I have comes uniquely from my own, personal experience, but I tend to focus on story. I love story. I think story is the most beautiful thing that we can share. I think, there's a reason we had bards back in the day, because they had an important role. They had to tell you story. And I am fascinated by story. So when I look at these things, I try to look at it through a lens of story. And by story, I mean like there's an arc and there's a reason and there's a purpose and there's beauty and there's an artistic sort of natural flow, in this. And so I tend to look at it as story, and all these new components and these new cases and these new pieces of information are padding this universe building, just much like you would if you were building Star Wars or if you were, building Interstellar. You need these universe building blocks to keep you enclosed in this fictional bubble. And so I'm not saying it's fiction, but I treat it as such until it's proven otherwise. And I think for me, that sustains my creativity, my creative thinking, and my interest into the topic. If I were to look at this practically, constantly, in a skeptical manner, I think I would burn myself out, and I probably would get a little cynical.
Yeah.
And so I try.
That's what I'm feeling. Right
yeah.
now. I'm totally burned out and cynical on all this stuff.
Yeah. So looking at it from like this beautiful storytelling lens,
That's cool, yeah.
with these storytelling elements, and then integrating that into the content that I make and creating these whimsical worlds to take people out for a spin. I think there's no harm in that. And I also think that, the medium is the message to some extent, where like, if I can help tell a story, like if you can't be better than everyone, be different type deal. So, for me, I look at my role in all of this as someone who perhaps my lack of knowledge and experience can be made up for with my ability to tell a story. And
I think you have a lot of knowledge too, but
thank you for saying that, but definitely a lot less than, than yourself or like Gerb or like any of the, no, absolutely. But I admire that. But I think what I make up for is this other sort of dimensionality. And in this space, I often talk about entertainment as being like a good thing for ufology, and some people believe the opposite. They say it ruins it.
Yeah, but it's tough, man, because the second you say it ruins it, you can't really decouple story from all of this.
Right, exactly. So what's real?
Yeah, what is it's extremely hard. It goes back to the thing of like, how do you know an electron exists? It's because it's like in textbooks and it's been measured by people.
Yeah.
By the way, for the record, I do believe electrons exist, but I'm taking it on faith.
Sure,
and then you have all these other stories, and it's like it comes down to your kind of political biases and your instincts, and like, you can lie and say that it's not, but it's like the basis of belief. Jake Barber said this in my interview with him, is like people don't really understand the basis of their beliefs.
I think that's definitely true. I also think that, relating it back to magic, there is something about the willing suspension of disbelief that enhances your experience and maybe your human experience here.
Yeah.
So I think if you're able to have enough cognitive,
pliability,
exactly, to be able to successfully, temporarily at least, suspend your disbelief to a few of these stories, I think it will enhance your experience on Earth. It may not give you the definitive answers.
Yeah.
But it will make the pursuit of those answers more joyful and meaningful.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really important in this subject, because if you're constantly just cynical or non-believing, or even the other way, just too believing and like get critical of other people saying what you're saying isn't real, I think you're missing out on like a whole world of discovery and beauty and whimsy that I think is really important. And I think that when you put yourself in that mind state, you tend to absorb more information. So, I could, spit facts at you all day, but by creating an environment that's more conducive to you wanting to be immersed there, you're going to absorb that information a lot more. We learn more things when we enjoy doing them.
Absolutely.
And rather than going to school for something, just getting out there and doing it because you're passionate about it, you're going to learn more there.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of the same. I treat it kind of in the same way. Let's have fun doing this.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we have to believe everything.
The energy with which the content is transmitted is you can't decouple that from the content itself. And people can say you could decouple it, but I do think that's how ideas take hold. It's not necessarily only the content. Like, we like to think that we are perfect measurement sensors of truth in some abstract sense, and we take away like the energy surrounding it, or the medium, or whatever, and it goes into some like code compiler, and that's just so not how we process anything.
Yeah, of course. Watch a movie without a soundtrack, and it won't be the same movie.
No, not
it's
at
the same
all.
script.
No, it'll seem so much lamer, and
it'll seem weird and empty.
Yeah,
and you won't retain most of it. You'll probably fall asleep. But
That's
like
right.
the soundtrack, all of a sudden now immerses you, and it gives you a reason to care, and puts you there, and makes you feel like you're a part of it. And because of that, you're retaining the information as if you're the one actually experiencing it.
Yes.
Rather than hearing someone else's experience, and that's a really important thing when learning something. I think we learn things for the purpose of survival.
Yeah.
And it's the reason why we're interested in a lot of drama. You think about drama. Why do people like drama? Why do people like drama? Because people like putting themselves in other people's positions, so they might be able to, through this connection, learn a lesson that they might not otherwise learn, right? So they're feeling it out. So what would I have done? And now they don't have to actually do that terrible thing. It's why we watch these murder docs and these like serial killers. Why are we obsessed? Because we like to put ourselves in those shoes. As sick as that sounds, we like to like just imagine it. It's like being in a roller coaster, being close to death without dying, and learning from that.
I think it's why these characters like, Elon or Trump, or even like Kanye right now, is like saying everything you're not allowed. Like, I'm Jewish, so I'm supposed to be like, this guy sucks or whatever, even though, love his early music. But like, there's something weirdly, like, it's hard to look away while he's like self-imploding online.
Yeah.
And it's something like, we all walk around as, it's like the Rousseau's Noble Savage or whatever, where it's like, we have to repress constantly. Everybody represses, as Freud would say this, everybody repress. And maybe Freud's specific idiosyncratic repressions were based on his own weird autobiography, but like, often it's we just do.
Yeah.
And then you see somebody and they're just so like unconstrained. They're just so weird. They're like these ubermenschy, figures or whatever. And, again,
funny term.
Yeah, especially in this context with Kanye, not endorsing anything he's saying, but there's some weird like voyeuristic, like I can't not see that, like and this bizarre desire to like live vicariously through that for a lot of people. I think I would assume, because like of the amount of traction he gets online to this day.
Yeah, you want to learn a lesson without having to learn the lesson.
Yeah,
because that helps you survive. It helps you grow as a person.
That's interesting.
And so, living through other people's experiences adds to our own data of what being here is. Collectively, we're kind of helping each other do that now with story.
Yeah.
And so if you can create really immersive stories, then you can help be that conduit for someone else to learn a lesson or to grow a little bit more in their own knowledge, versus just having them read text or saying something monotonously. You can create an environment where they're more conducive to learn something new.
I love that, man. And it's so beautiful. I mean, it really does speak to like, why do certain ideas die on the vine, and why do others take hold? We think of, ideas that make it into the modern zeitgeist, whether it's in science, politics, curriculum in school, as being this like, oh, this reached some like truthiness threshold, so like it's now in the textbook, it's now in the canon or whatever. And in fact, it's like history is told by the winners, and like the winners like know how to tell their story extremely charismatically. Yeah. And so it's just a fascinating kind of new frame through which to, and I think your show itself embodies this like just beautiful. I mean, you're like, your set is like amazing. You have like this skiff that looks like this sort of mid-century, really cool kind of space age thing with like all these knobs and toggles. You're like wide shot is literally this overhead security camera, and then you're wearing like the suspenders, you're like this like detective or whatever, and it's this beautiful, it's like two things. It like you're like in it and you're like, wow, this is real, but then also you can kind of cover like really crazy stuff because you kind of have an out where you're like, yeah, I'm just wearing suspenders and I'm sitting in this fake skiff, whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's both. It's both kind of, plausible deniability for you.
Yeah.
And it's also like the most immersive, beautiful experience for the viewer. And I see that like, going to the moon as far as growth.
I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for taking notice. But yeah, just taking you out for a spin. That's the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Chris, this is an honor, man. Everybody go subscribe to Area 52, become a member on YouTube, go to the Discord. You have really cool, thoughtful, you have the interns on Discord.
Yep.
And you guys do kind of reading groups together. Sometimes you have movie nights.
Yep.
So it's a stepwise better experience, in my opinion, like than other just random kind of communities that don't really get thought about. It's just kind of like a way to monetize. Not the case with you.
Yeah.
You have a Patreon as well, right?
Yeah, it's all linked together. So Patreon and membership are the same thing. Kind of, they allow you all the top secret access to the secret section of the Discord and all that stuff and all the cool stuff. But essentially, you could just join the Discord for free if you just want to find like a community. We keep a positive vibe there and an open mind. We try to really keep it friendly without having too many politics involved. Like, we're just there to share story and to like, what if?
Awesome, man. Well, maybe the whole world is a stage. We're just in it. Chris, this is an honor, man. It's so fun.
Thank you.
I'm still trying to figure out how I think maybe at least with my code, that you
shoulder surfed you or something.
Yeah, well, I think you felt the impacts of what, because I clicked that in, right? Or maybe something around that. I don't know. You guys go figure it out. Awesome, man.
Hey, dude.
Appreciate it. Before we go, just a reminder that this episode was sponsored by
Surfshark. Don't miss out on the extra 4 months
at surfshark.com/American Alchemy. The link is right below in the description.
Stay curious, stay safe, and I'll see you next time on American Alchemy.
Dude, this isn't your show. They're going to see me, not you.
Stay tuned, stay curious, stay safe, and you'll see him next time on American Alchemy.
Thanks.